Stop, Friendly Fire. Chapter 44-45. Chapter 44. Byron Infiltration. Byron was located in the Level 4 danger zone and was an extremely large city, which led directly to the capital. He knew he needed to go there eventually. But to think that Arama Steelworker was going over there, this was obviously no coincidence. Arama Steelworker, huh, that's correct. You already knew that their movements were unusual following our last great battle. We've also seen the Emperor's forces and the anti-Skull fight in a few small skirmishes, but did they make any suspicious moves after that? Yes. Arama Steelworker and some golems, which emitted a strong energy, appeared where you said they would, and we've confirmed that they're moving in a particular direction. It's the route to Byron. As I thought. Good work. It's important info. But you mentioned that their movements weren't particularly hidden? Yes. They moved so conspicuously that I suspect it was on purpose. Please take that into consideration. He could trust in the chimeras and their hostility towards Arama Steelworker, but something smelled off with their info. Why was Arama Steelworker acting now, when he had been so quiet thus far? According to the information he'd procured on the surface, Arama Steelworker wasn't the type to take risks against the undead Emperor. Moreover, he's showing himself and going to Byron? That was way too suspicious. That guy's objective might be the heroes instead. Everything was progressing as the Magic Emperor wished. However, all of the heroes were currently underground and attempting to overthrow the undead Emperor. A few of the 12 generals had been killed, and killing the undead Emperor had become an actual possibility. Perhaps Arama Steelworker was wary of the heroes interrupting his plan. If not, then perhaps he was trying to eliminate them in case they posed a threat to the surface. No, that was unlikely. Since Arama Steelworker should have in-depth knowledge regarding the underground barrier. If it's none of those options, then there's only one possibility left. He may be trying to kill the Heaven-defying general. Paul Zero, or the Heaven-defying general, was considered the hottest potato underground. They didn't know where the Heaven-defying general would pop up, and he was bizarre, as he acted outside the scope of normal undead behavior. No one could tell whether the Heaven-defying general was really an undead or not. Thus, there was a high likelihood of Arama Steelworker being wary of him. Arama Steelworker's conspicuous movements must be to draw the Heaven-defying general to Byron and annihilate his forces. Let's assume this information has been leaked to the other heroes. He may be trying to get the Heaven-defying general and the heroes to meet. Shin Woo quickly organized his thoughts. And then, he smiled bitterly at the Kai-Pals, who were awaiting his orders, and said, "I'm going to Byron. I have another mission for you. But my lord, it's a trap, I know. He's probably trying to get us, the Imperial troops, and the heroes to fight against each other. Going with a large force is a bad idea." "That's true, but my lord, I'm concerned for your safety." They claimed they were concerned for his safety, but they couldn't hide their thirst for vengeance that dwelled within their blazing goblin fire. If anyone other than their master, Shin Woo, had ordered them not to go, then they might have fought back. Shin Woo smiled bitterly and explained, "If I bring you all with me, then they'll know I'm the Heaven-defying general. Also, you don't have to be concerned for my safety. Even if he attacks me with all 4 of the 4 heavenly commanders, I can win all by myself. Of course, he could have something hidden up his sleeve, but the moment we face off head-to-head, he'll be no match for me. I'm sure of it. You see, I have a secret weapon of my own." A weapon? That's right. Once he'd ascertained Arama Steelworker's true identity, he'd given Bisher Moon a single order through Rem. Bisher Moon had fulfilled his duty and gotten Shin Woo what he'd wanted. Fortunately, Bisher had passed it on to him before Shin Woo had to leave the surface. So long as he had that, there was no chance that he'd lose to Arama Steelworker. Though I wasn't able to create a new seal that surpassed Arama Steelworker's. The end justifies the means. What's important was that Arama Steelworker's golem army posed absolutely no threat to Shin Woo. Shin Woo didn't even consider him a target anymore. He was worried about the other 12 generals interfering, especially Sigald von Rededane, one of the 12 generals, who possessed the title of Fireslayer Sword God. He was part of the 4 heavenly commanders. The undead who commanded the organization, Anti-Skull. How would he, who researched till the bitter end so that his people didn't turn into the undead, have turned out? Would he be deluded, just like the undead emperor? If not, Then would he be independent and free-willed like Shin Woo? Perhaps my greatest foe will be him. Would Segald have missed Arama steelworkers' movements? Unlikely. He'd even encountered Shin Woo's troops, who had moved as secretly as possible. They had been quiet until now, but if they decided to act in earnest, then their mobility and information gathering wouldn't lose to any of the other factions. I suppose I won't know anything for sure until I meet him in person. Meet who? Anyone. This might be as big of a mess as the one on the surface. You're the one who's going to make the mess, Shin Woo. Just like what you've done up till now. I'm just preparing myself thoroughly. Prepare yourself for the worst, ready yourself for every variable, and then make your move. This line of thinking had become even better ever since he'd gained the wildcard skill. If Jin could read his mind, then she'd say, so in the other words, you're going to make a mess of things from now on too. And despair, but fortunately, she didn't possess a mind-reading skill. I wanted to go only after I gathered a few more maps. He possessed 3 Byron inner maps. These maps were dropped by the 12 generals. Unfortunately, each of the 3 maps' contents were different. If he had 2 more maps, or even just 1 more, then he would be able to compare the differences among them and create a singular map, but it couldn't be helped. He didn't have any more. Shin Woo had no other choice but to arrive on site and rely on his wildcard skill. Who, Lord Paul Zero? Good grief. Shin Woo shrugged his shoulders and sighed. However, Kai Paul was looking straight at him. His gaze was so intense that it felt like lasers would shoot out of them. Fine, let's go. You have to try and get your revenge, don't you? Really, their very essence was made up of vengeance. He couldn't stop them from coming, especially when they wanted to meet the target of their revenge so badly. Above all, Shin Woo felt slightly guilty towards all of his undead subordinates. He thought that if his subordinates had free will, then he'd respect it. However, that had turned out to be a lie. I'm going to pretend to be a human. I told you before, but we can't go together. So we'll space ourselves out, exchange opinions from afar, and then act. Understood. Kai Paul was a level 7 elite. Ever since he had been in Shin Woo's service, he had been a level 7 elite. However, he had grown immensely, and through this recent round of bone reinforcement, his stats were almost at 9,000. Moreover, 4 of the other Kai Pauls had gotten to level 7 through their recent reinforcement, so they were more than enough to take on one of the 12 generals. If he used them well, then they would definitely be a lot of help to him. It's nice to be back underground. After all, I can call guys like this without hesitation. Now that he thought about it, Shin Woo's actions on the surface had been a one-man show. Even his most trustworthy ally, the Pope, hadn't stepped foot onto the battlefield and was the type to show his true worth when dealing with other people. Shin Woo wondered how Jin was doing on the surface, but soon grinned and organized his thoughts. Then, get ready to leave. I'll do a final check over the data. Yes, sir. Was there really any need to look over the data? Shin Woo wanted to pay his respects to his seniors before the battle, and it was also meant to act as a pick-off throw. He then accessed the chatting channel. Shin Woo. Seniors, have you all been well? Lloyd HK. I feel like I'm going to die. Arian Ruparte. I feel for you. We just got out of a dungeon. You have good timing, Shin Woo. The first person to greet him was Lloyd. He'd gone through a lot, but Shin Woo could say that Lloyd was, without question, the most hero-like of the heroes. After his duel with Shin Woo, Lloyd had matured mentally a little bit, and had become a hero that would really suit a comic book. Shin Woo. I'm glad you're all right. I just cleared a dungeon myself. It's nice that there are so many dungeons in the level 4 danger zone. Lloyd HK. But there's danger lurking everywhere. You never know when you'll meet one of the 12 generals. Prince Altania. I agree 100%. Shin Woo. Senior Prince, there's no reason to deliberately follow Kracia's speech pattern, is there? Prince Altania. I'm not. It's just that, hanging out with her for so long has made me talk a lot less. She didn't seem to talk any less than before, but he just grinned and went with the flow. He felt at peace somewhere in his heart, as he was able to talk with his comrades after such a long time. It was a relationship filled with lies and deceit, but he felt warmth from the relationship regardless. Perhaps this was proof that he was changing. Arian Rupate. I was concerned since you hadn't kept in contact for so long. Though I know that you're the type of person who works well alone. Shin Woo. I apologize. I knew I needed to get a lot stronger, so I was completely absorbed in my endeavors. Lloyd HK. It's fine, since you're okay. You see, I have high expectations for you. I was able to grow because of you, so I hope you always stay as you are. Why am I suddenly saying something so embarrassing? Prince Altania. So you can feel embarrassment, huh? You really have grown. Lloyd HK. Prince, you. Will there come a day where he tells them the truth? If not, then would it be better if he never told some of them, since he can assume a perfect human form? He briefly pondered on the multiple scenarios that popped up in his head and just grinned. Shin Woo realized that he considered the other heroes as comrades or allies. Back then, when he had first come to the Underground Empire, he would have held his stomach in laughter. Of course, this had only become possible because he had become so strong that none of them could pose a threat to him. But still, allies, huh? It wasn't a bad feeling. That was even more surprising, but Shin Woo decided to accept that newfound feeling. Perhaps this was natural growth that came about due to his level up. Prince Altania. In any case, Kratia suggested that we meet up. You must have it rough being alone, Junior, so I'll come personally too. Shin Woo. I'm going to Byron right now. It's a large city within the level 4 danger zone. Is there anyone currently in that area? Lloyd HK. Byron. Prince Altania. Ute, they muttered, but none of the other heroes said yes. It was exactly as he'd expected. It would be dangerous anyway, as there was a chance that the other 12 generals, or undead forces would be there, so he was just going to warn them that they shouldn't approach. Shin Woo. Yes, it's dangerous. And it'll get even more dangerous from here on out. I recommend that you do not approach Byron unless I ask you for help. You too, Senior Prince. That's right, this was his way of keeping his seniors out of danger, but... Sarah von Redidane. I'm already on my way there. What a coincidence, Shin Woo. Would you like to meet up? Huh? A coincidence? He was pretty sure he should be the one saying that. The person he'd least wanted to associate himself with had taken the bait. Sarah von Redidane. I felt uneasy going alone, but I'd feel a lot better going with someone as talented as you. Let's meet in front of the city. Shin Woo. Oh, that's Sarah von Redidane. Then let's do that. I'll send you a private chat request when I get close. Ms. Sarah von Redidane has left the chat. Redidane had one-sidedly left the chat without giving Shin Woo the chance to retort. He was dumbfounded by the unexpected turn of events and remained quiet for a moment. Then, Lloyd interjected. Lloyd HK. She definitely likes him. Arian Ruparte. Doesn't she just like him as a strong hero? Though I felt that exchange just now was a bit strange as well. Did she just acknowledge him as her partner? It seems like Redidane, who had always acted alone, is finally forming a party. Prince Altania. That woman's really unpleasant. Hey, Junior, PM me a little later. Shin Woo. Senior, please don't shorten it like that. Sarah von Redidane. He couldn't get a read on her. But it was a fact that accompanying her to Byron and watching her would be more comfortable for him than sending her off by herself. Especially because Sigald may interfere. It'll be a lot harder to use Wildcard, it seems. Wildcard was the ability to set up a stage where his victory was absolute. However, it first required that he completely understood the situation and its many variables. Adding in a level 8 hero like her would create more problems for him. But recognizing and controlling those factors was what the Joker karma was all about. I can't forget about my promise with Plane either. Even if he let her foolishly enter Byron alone, all that awaited her was a dog's death at the hands of Arema Steelworker or Sigald von Redidane. He was glad that she was being more active in overthrowing the Underground Empire, but no matter how enthusiastic she was, she would still die. Shin Woo. I feel like she made the decision on a whim, but it feels good to form a party with such a powerful battle priest. In any case, for the time being, please don't even think of approaching Byron. Lloyd HK. Shin Woo, hit me up with a private chat later. I want to know how far you two went. Gek, Arian Ruparte. She may not look it, but Redidane is a delicate woman. She's deeply regretful too. Shin Woo, please take care of her. I trust you. Contrary to the witless Lloyd, Arian implored him to understand her, as she was a woman herself. To Li Shin Woo, Sarah von Rededane's inner darkness wasn't as simple as she suggested, but he nodded his head for now. However, Prince Altania, PM. Gogo, Ms. Prince Altania has left the chat. Li Shin Woo, Lloyd HK. Seems like Prince likes Li Shin Woo too. Arian Ruparte. Lloyd, please don't say that to Prince. Seriously, Lloyd HK. Of course I won't. Do I really look that witless? I won't tell her in person. Arian Ruparte. Oh, Lord. Arian sighed. Li Shin Woo grinned and was getting ready to leave the chatting channel. However, there was something that he remembered. Li Shin Woo. What about our rookie? Celine Viesa. Lloyd HK. Ah, that guy. I haven't seen him lately. Li Shin Woo. Arian Ruparte. I'm worried that something might have happened to him. Since we can still request a private chat, he's not dead, but... Li Shin Woo. I'll try to contact him later. He felt uneasy. It's too late, he suddenly thought. What could have happened during the 2 months he'd been gone? In any case, he would eventually learn Celine Viesa's fate so long as he was still here. If he could, he would at least pick up Celine Viesa's bone. He then left the chatting channel. It was fine since the private chat request hadn't disconnected. Li Shin Woo had gotten a private chat request from both Kracia and Prince simultaneously, but he chose Kracia first. It's been a while. Yeah, good job. He decided not to ask. She seemed to agree with him, as she went on to the main point. Byron, we'll go there too. Our special training's done with, and Prince has gotten a lot better, personality-wise. There's a chance that Arema Steelworker, Sigald von Rededane, and the other 12 generals will show up. To put it bluntly, it'll be dangerous for you too. We've trained enough. I want to become stronger now too. Like you. How did you know? Shin Woo, you may seem bold, but you're actually quite thorough. If you weren't at least level 8 by now, then you wouldn't be going there. You've probably gotten some new ability too. I can't wait. I really want to see it. As expected, her intuition was sharp. Li Shin Woo smiled bitterly and agreed with her. But he didn't forget to warn her. I may not be able to keep you safe. You might die. I'm like you, Shin Woo. I won't go if there's a chance that I could die. If I do die, then it's because I miscalculated. I won't hate you. If you die, then it'll feel pretty awkward for me, but... Well, whatever. If you're that confident, then I'll leave you to it. Ah, Senior Prince too. If need be, make me into a named undead. I like being a human, but being an undead would be kind of interesting too. Don't say that kind of thing, even as a joke. Li Shin Woo exchanged a few more words with her, and after designating the time and place they were going to meet, closed the private chat. He then declined Prince's private chat request since she was with Kracia, and decided to just ignore her for now. After all, harassing her like this would get a better reaction out of her. So wait, 3 more girls are going to be joining up with us? We've just gotten away from Jin Jin and that spirit. Is that really that important? It is. Jin kicked the air with her legs, as if she were displeased, and fluttered her steel-covered wings. They were currently flying. She'd lowered her speed so that the Kai Pals would be able to follow them, but she slowed down even more. The Kai Pals were chimeras, so they were capable of morphing their bodies. With it, they could change their stats slightly. Their running mode was fast enough to keep up with Jin, who was flying at a leisurely pace. Let's make some time for just the 2 of us. Feel free to train your skills in the meantime. Li Shin Woo was speechless at the loving and honest skeleton horse's response and trained his skills as she suggested. He imparted his mana into the 17 weapons floating around them and controlled them. At the same time, he trained his manetization. If he felt it became too easy, then he would study the light element as well. The high-rank light element has become LV5 and magic has increased by 20. He had started training it last, but it was the first to level up. He was astonished that it had gone all the way up to level 5 when he had gotten it just a short while ago. But by absorbing the Garuda's bone and the shining bone sword, his understanding of the light element had deepened. Therefore, it wasn't completely unreasonable that he was making such progress with it. You're not going to train those innate elements or whatnot. Studying an innate element requires that I understand my own existence. In other words, you can't attain them by focusing on a single point. It only becomes meaningful when other people are added into the fray, and their focus points are linked and fused together with your own. So, making a lame attempt by yourself won't get you anywhere. Moreover, it's not something you can train while you're on the move either. They weren't innate elements for nothing. The dark shadow element, which was only at the beginner level, was a lot harder to use and used much more mana than the high-rank light element. Of course, he could gather that much mana in the blink of an eye now. The monetization skill has become LV2, and health and magic have increased by 10. A portion of your skin is monetized. Although your physical strength decreases, you have a chance to ignore physical attacks. A portion of your strength, health, and agility are monetized. Next up was his monetization. This skill would monetize more and more of his body, depending on its level. As Shin Woo had expected, this skill had changed his other stats into magic, from the 10s to the 100s, once it had leveled up. Just in case, he tested it out. He was able to redefine himself whenever he wanted to redistribute his stats. This was as expected as well. Shin Woo had a really high affinity with this skill. It was a skill that would help him become whatever he wanted, a skill comparable to the Joker's innate skills. If I could, I'd coop myself up somewhere and train, but the situation won't allow it. Shin Woo, I honestly think that you can already do whatever you want right now. Jin, I'm the type who gets to the max level before fighting the boss. I have no idea what you're talking about. She didn't understand what he was saying, but as she wanted, they were alone together and they could talk freely. Before they left, Shin Woo had inspected himself, which allowed him to level up his skills. The monetization skill has become LV3 and health and magic have increased by 10. A portion of your internal body is monetized and you can more effectively handle mana. But at the same time, your muscular strength decreases proportionally. A portion of your strength, health, and magic is monetized. If I can, I'd like to level it up to level 5 before I get there. But is it not possible for a high-rank skill like this? It's amazing that you were even able to level it up to level 3 in such a short period of time. Shin Woo touched his halfway transparent hand and inspected his monetization skill for the last time. After that, he returned his hand to its normal, human state. His stats, which had been converted into mana, were returned to their original values as well. He wasn't entirely sure before he'd started training his skills, but now he was. Once he mastered this skill and leveled up his disguise skill even further, his bone-related skills would be able to affect everything, not just bone. But Shin Woo, why do you think Sarah von Rededane is going to Byron all of a sudden? Did she figure out where the Fire Slayer Sword God or the Golden General were going? That's unlikely. She said she was going there before I even said anything, so she has no ulterior motive for me. They had gotten close to their destination and gradually began their descent. Shin Woo, who'd finished inspecting his skills and had been talking to Jin, realized one possibility and was shocked. Rededane took most of the loot from killing the Vulture General. If that's the case, then maybe she has one of the Byron inner maps too. Then there are 4 of them. It's safer now, so isn't that better for us? It is. Jin cheered, and Shin Woo agreed with him. Immediately after, his voice became slightly lower. If I could tell her that I killed 2 more of the 12 generals, that is. Oh, he could already see the 3 women from afar waiting at their meeting place. It was time to make a choice. Shin Woo briefly thought about it and soon made his decision. I see you 2 came as well. It doesn't matter to me. As long as you don't hold me back. Once she saw Prince and Kratia, Sarah von Rededane shrugged her shoulders and said. She was being genuine, but she still managed to piss Prince off. Hold you back? Didn't you see me use that really strong spell back then? You ever heard of the fire demon? Yes, I saw it. It was indeed a powerful spell, but I'm not sure you'll be able to protect yourself with it. A magician is most powerful when protected by several of their allies. However, there aren't that many of us, and we're attempting to infiltrate a city where we don't know how many enemies there are or where they are. I do believe you're not cut out for this. But, and please call me Rededane. Rededane pointed out her flaws, being correct from start to finish, and Prince became weak. Shin Woo smiled bitterly and added, we'll have to move covertly, but I'll take care of it. Since I have just the skill for it. As expected of my junior. You do the things that Rededane can't do so naturally. It makes me shiver in excitement. That sounds incredibly unpleasant. You're spiteful towards me for some reason, while you're really possessive of Shin Woo. Though I don't have any complaints if you can deal with the issue of stealth. It seemed only natural that she acted this way if he took into consideration that she was a level 8 hero with the highest seniority, but to Shin Woo, who knew about all the forces involved with Byron and the inside story on Redidane, he felt like her actions were foolish, or even a bit cute. She must be hoping that Sigald doesn't come. He briefly organized his thoughts and then asked Redidane. This was to put the decision he'd made beforehand into motion. Redidane, do you have a reason for going to Byron? Yes, now that you mention it, I wanted to talk about that. Redidane then pulled out a piece of paper from her chest. As he suspected, it was a Byron inner map. Ooh, I got this from the Vulture General. You should remember seeing it when I was distributing the loot. It seems like it's only given to the one who inflicted the most damage to him. In this case, me. As expected, that's why the map had automatically come to him when he'd killed the Beast General. Shin Woo thoroughly looked over the map. While he was analyzing the map and mentally comparing it to the other maps he owned, she continued to speak. I wondered why this came off of one of the 12 generals, and also suspected that it might be a trap. I came to the conclusion that I needed to see for myself. After that, I investigated for 2 months and prepared my skills and equipment. When I was about to leave, Shin Woo mentioned Byron. So what, you think it was fate? Redidane explained calmly, but it seemed like Prince found something unpleasant about it, as she pouted suddenly. Then, Redidane nodded her head seriously. Yes, the fact that Shin Woo was headed to Byron too means that God is leading us there. I feel like there's something important in Byron. Something that's related to our purification of the underground empire. Oh, that's what you were talking about. What else is there? Oh, nothing. Never mind. Redidane ignored Prince's clearly suspicious signs. Kracia softly hit the back of Prince's head instead, and Shin Woo inwardly applauded, and went deeper into her motives. Moreover, I know this place well. You know this place well? Perhaps. No. My family wasn't responsible for this area. It's just that, this place was created for a special reason. A special reason? Yes. This city was created for spirits. For a moment, Shin Woo stopped moving. Redidane retained her bitter expression. The citizens of the Empire loved spirits. They believed that spirits were God's representatives and that their forms were far more developed than humans. Thus, elementalists, who could commune with spirits and borrow their power, were treated very well. I see. That's only natural, since only those who loved spirits and the spirits themselves were sent underground. Shin Woo nodded his head and Kracia's eyes shined. Most magicians reject elementalists, since their power often goes against a magician's reason. Like Shin Woo, you didn't have to add that last part. It's strange that the Empire, which had progressed their magic engineering so far, would love spirits so much. There were, of course, some people within the Empire that hated spirits as well. Redidane confirmed Kracia's theory with a nod of her head. Byron was created to protect the spirits and the elementalists from such individuals. It's connected directly to the capital, the lake is clean and beautiful, and there are several mountains around it. It's a place well suited for the spirits. The palace's elementalist order used Byron as a branch office as well. And what about protecting the spirits? If the spirits are scattered, then there's a chance that they'll be hunted down by humans, but if they're all in one place, then even the entire Night Order would be no match for them. The Empire wanted to create a place where the spirits could stay and relax. Though it was a failure. A failure, Perhaps joining up with Redidane had been a good idea, since there was no other way to obtain such detailed information about the Empire, aside from someone who had actually lived during that time. Shin Woo inwardly nodded in satisfaction at Granny Redidane's story as she was just getting to the climax of the story. They wanted to create a special dungeon called the Spirits Spring within Byron. They sought to create a space where only spirits and those the spirits permitted could enter, but in the process, something went wrong. The palace's elementalist leader, Princess Dana von Etleber, was put in charge of creating the Spirits Spring, and was also put in charge of Byron as well. Dana von Etleber, he could tell how this was going to end. Shin Woo had heard this story and this person's name before. Shin Woo narrowed his eyes and Redidane continued calmly. He briefly felt an indescribable sadness and fury from her expression, but Li Shin Woo wanted to believe that it was just a delusion. He wanted to believe it was, but she is also one of the 12 generals, called the Spirit General. To this day, she's probably still in Byron. Kraisha and Prince's eyes widened. Li Shin Woo just sighed. We don't know whether or not the other 12 generals will come, but there's already one of them there. Plus, it should be filled with several corrupted spirits as well. Even so, I will find her. I was scared thus far, but I believe now is the time to go looking for her. Li Shin Woo, could you please help me? Are you prepared to fight against the 12 generals? Yes. After all, it's our duty to take down the 12 generals. Good. Just keep thinking like that. You're quite reliable. Please make sure I don't lose my way. It seemed like she was trying her best to not show any signs, but Li Shin Woo could hear the loneliness within her voice. Redidane, who was likely the daughter of a duke, must have been close with the princess. He thought she was just a crazy woman who was only interested in killing the undead, but looking at her now, perhaps her hatred towards the undead wasn't so simple. He felt that pointless feeling slightly, very slightly. With this party, killing the 12 generals is... No, it's a piece of cake. We've only gathered elites. If we exclude you, Prince. Why would you exclude me? I've gotten a lot stronger too. I've really gotten a lot stronger. Taking on one of the 12 generals isn't an issue. I already told you that there wouldn't be just one or two of them there. If you're not confident, then you can turn around now. Prince was pissed as she hung onto Kraisha and questioned Redidane, but Li Shin Woo replied calmly. Hearing that, Prince straightened her back, as if ice had been poured onto it, and responded confidently, even while pouting. I'm all ready. I'm just shaking a bit. Since I'm so excited, then you're fine. I came prepared too, so I have something to show you. Li Shin Woo then took out 3 pieces of paper. The 3 women tilted their heads, but one of them stiffened at the sight of the papers. They're all Byron inner maps. Li Shin Woo, where did you get these? I got each of them from a different member of the 12 generals. What? Kraisha remained calm, as it wasn't news to her. Prince's pupils shook. Sarah von Redidane didn't even respond, she just looked stiff. Li Shin Woo didn't give them a chance to respond and continued. I'm not sure how Byron was when you last saw it, but the Imperial troops have made a lot of changes to it. And if we put all the maps together, then... Wait, it's filled with traps everywhere. Such vicious traps at that. The worst part about it is that there may be more maps than just these 4. There are 12 generals, per their title. But the chance of that is low. Of course, there may be some fakes among the maps, but, with this many of them, we should be able to pick the safest route by comparing them, no? He was originally going to do this, but he didn't say that and just looked at Redidane. She was still looking at the maps with a stiff expression, but once she realized that he was waiting for her response, she quietly agreed. My knowledge will be helpful in your analysis. But we'll need some time to prepare. We should stay here before we infiltrate the city. I'm sorry everyone, but could you prepare the camp? Of course. She probably had much she wanted to ask him and much she wanted to tell him, but she generously let it go. Whereas Prince looked like she wanted to ask Li Shin Woo 100 questions, but Kraisha immediately stopped her. You knew, didn't you, that my junior took down some of the other 12 generals alone? Of course, since I was with him each time. So technically he didn't take them down alone. We took them down together. Ah, Li Shin Woo had not only killed a few of the 12 generals in an unknown place without her knowledge, but Li Shin Woo and Kraisha had taken them out, just the 2 of them, though Jin was actually with them as well. Upon this realization, Prince screamed and was hit by Kraisha again. Why didn't you tell me? I knew you'd worry about me. I'm sorry, senior. We didn't fight them because we wanted to. We had the misfortune of running into them, so we had no choice but to fight them to survive. Ah, it was a lie, of course, but Li Shin Woo's acting was enough to trick her. Redidane, who was standing beside them and perusing the maps, nodded slightly. She probably attributed that to why Li Shin Woo was so strong. In any case, I've gotten a lot stronger too. You don't need to do something so dangerous alone anymore. Just follow me. Okay, senior. Then please help me set up this tent. Leave it to me. He really loved idiots. They were so easy to manipulate. Li Shin Woo watched Prince busily move around to set up the tent and smiled. Beside him, Kraisha and Jin were speechless, but as always, Li Shin Woo just ignored them. Prince groaned as she attempted to set up the tent, but was unable to, so Kraisha came over to help. While they were at it, Shin Woo started cooking dinner. He took out fresh vegetables and meat from his inventory, and even had rice, which was all hard to acquire, even from the secret shop. Seeing that, Prince's eyes popped out. Where did you get that? Did you go to the surface or something? I obviously bought it from the secret shop. Of course he'd brought it from the surface. He had stored the Lawrence shop's best products in his inventory, but he'd never have guessed that she'd figure it out on her first try. Shin Woo was shocked by her insight and somehow gave her the slip, but it unfortunately had the opposite effect. Liar, I've never seen such juicy meat before. What kind of meat is this? No, the meat's one thing, but I've never seen this grain in the secret shop before. I've never seen these spices before either. Shin Woo, you know how to cook too. Yeah, I know camp cooking. Wait and see, you'll love it. While Shin Woo prepared a fire in the food, Prince and Kraisha hung around him, fiddling with the meat's bone or chewing on the uncooked rice rather than setting up the tent. It seemed like they couldn't believe how good the ingredients were. Then, Redidane, who had been diligently studying the maps, silently said, "Saving the best products and giving them to her favorites is just like her." "What, Junior, are you and that terrifying shopkeeper?" "Senior, this is all money. You can buy the shopkeeper's affection with money." "Affection, as I thought, you. This senior's a real pain in the ass." The dinner menu consisted of a stew that consisted of meat, veggies, and wine. He'd also used the meat's fat to fry off some arancini as well. The stew and the rice were finished at the same time. He added in the leftover veggies, meat, and cheese from his inventory, and then crushed the bread into a fine powder. Shin Woo coated the mixture and fried it off. If he were to add a hot ragu sauce, it'd be perfect. This really is a man's cooking. That's what I said. Please make do with this ready-made sauce. I've never seen this ready-made sauce before. It's delicious. Prince grabbed the arancini with both hands and downed them, throwing all etiquette away with the wind. Kraisha didn't really like eating, but it seemed like she was satisfied with the taste, and Redidane was surprisingly a glutton. Her face was as icy as ever, but he could tell that she was satisfied with the meal based on how much she ate. "Thank you for the fine meal. It's not nearly enough in return, but I'll brew us some tea." "Thank you. How's it going? I keep looking at the maps, but it's hard. It may be impossible to find a route without any danger. When I'm finished cleaning, I'll come and help you." Once they were finished doing the dishes and preparing camp, the four gathered around and put all their attention into finding the safest route. They were shocked by how large Byron was, and they were just as surprised to find that the Empire had laid magic traps all over the city. Why did they have to go this far? Wasn't this a city designed for spirits? It seems to operate by drawing magic from the city's inhabitants. There must have been another reason. Probably. Last I saw her, the princess was really tired, and she seemed to be hesitating about something. Perhaps another project was underway at the same time as the Spirit's Spring project. The Spirit's Spring project. The party studied the maps and conversed. In the middle of that, Shin Woo dwelled on the word, Spirit's Spring. At first, he thought they were modeling it after the Spirit's Spring on the surface, but there was a chance that it was something else entirely. Especially because Byron was covered by a type of mana he was quite familiar with, spatial mana. It was even more likely if the Archmage, Theotane von Seldin, was involved with the city. Well, I guess I'll find out when I get inside. And so long as the Archmage himself doesn't appear, I have nothing to worry about. He was able to get Redidane's help, so the current situation was a lot better than he'd anticipated. They were beginning to decipher the contents of the maps, and Shin Woo relayed these details to the faraway Kai Paul through his assimilation skill and his darkness element-induced telepathy, and nodded his head. The sight of the Empire's darkness covering Byron made him feel like a demon would pop out. In other words, they're on my stage. What did you just say, Junior? Nothing. I'm just excited as to how strong our enemies will be. With Redidane's memories and the four maps, as well as Shin Woo's insight, they were able to complete the map by tomorrow morning. If we go through this route, then, we should be able to avoid critical danger. Even if we can deal with the magical traps, we can't deal with all the physical ones. If we're unlucky, then, we may end up with normal critical injuries. I don't think critical injuries are normal in any way. There are also critical injuries. The four heroes, plus Jin, had finished off yesterday's stew, steeled themselves, and set off on their designated route. Fortunately, there was no threat of danger along the way, but the closer they got to the city's walls, the more shocked they were by the scale of the city. What a huge moat! It must be hard for humans to manage. To my knowledge, it was cared for with the help of water spirits, but I'm not sure how it is anymore. Kyaha. Once Redidane was finished talking, they heard a shriek from the center of the moat, which was wide enough to be a lake. Shin Woo could see the spirits coming up from underneath the water. LV5 corrupted Undine. Its translucent body, reminiscent of slimes, was mixed with foul water. If they were all at the corrupted stage, then it meant that there was no helping them anymore. They were far too contaminated. Upon seeing the spirit in such a state, Shin Woo bitterly smacked his lips, but then, more and more corrupted Undines popped up everywhere. There were other dangers aside from the traps I see. They're probably here to distract you enough to set off the traps. The entire city is set up with traps designed to kill intruders. But we're lucky. This is easy. Kraisha quietly took a step forward and extended her hand. The tiny orb, the eternal ice shined, and radiated light within the air. Then, the plentiful water filling the moat froze over. G-geek, G-G-G-G-G-G. The corrupted Undines were also caught by her spell, and merely screamed, as they couldn't get out of the ice. Kraisha ignored their cries and took another step forward. The moat was frozen solid, so they could walk wherever they pleased. The party watched, dumbfounded, then hesitated for a moment before following after her. To think you were able to freeze such a large area? You didn't reach level 8 already, did you? Shin Woo killed one of the corrupted Undine to see what loot they dropped, but he already possessed both high-rank water and ice elements, so he didn't feel as though their drops would increase them any further. If they had any effect, then he might have sent his party off first, stayed back, and killed the Undines. Kai Paul, take this opportunity to go into the city too. If you're this far away, there's no chance of you running into us. Understood. Once we've safely infiltrated the city, I will report to you again. They crossed over the frozen moat and were met by the front gate. This was also Kraisha's job. It was set up so that a person without sufficient magical knowledge would be unable to open it without being bombarded by magic shells. However, Shin Woo had figured out that around half of the mechanisms that fired those magic shells were already broken. They were destroyed so technically and delicately that a normal person would not likely realize it. It seems like someone's already inside. The Imperial troops wouldn't have been caught by the traps. So then who would? She must have come to a realization as she spoke. While speaking, Redidane's complexion changed. Her eyebrows wriggled ever so slightly. Shin Woo just shrugged his shoulders. I wonder, perhaps it's another faction unrelated to the Imperial Army. Shin Woo, you knew? I'm not privy to the details, but I had a hunch. I don't know what they're doing inside, so let's hurry. Kook. But no matter how rushed they were, they actually didn't progress that quickly. It was because the very core of the magic traps that covered Byron was spatial magic. Theotain von Seldin had put his heart and soul into this giant magic circle that covered the city. It would blur one's senses, partially distort the surrounding space, reduce it, and ultimately not allow one to move as they wished. Even if one knew the right path, one would have to go round and round in order to escape the effects of the spatial magic. Moreover, there were magic circles across the city that sucked in magic. These would steal magic from anyone lost in the city and torment them. What's worse, these magic circles would use the stolen magic to activate the magic traps. It was like a demonic world. Would the capital also be like this? What could they possibly be hiding that they're going to all the effort to? Magic. Terrifying magic. Kraisha, who had been constantly emitting her mana and leading the party on the right path, quietly reported. Shin Woo sympathized with her and nodded his head. There's a high concentration of magic focused in one place, which cannot be explained by human logic. Spirit's spring? No. The magic's far too aggressive. Countless elements are gathered in one place, but it's not natural. I'm curious what Shin Woo thinks, since he's a spirit expert. I'm no spirit expert. I won't know until I get close. But I do wonder whether this place was really set up for spirits. Shin Woo could understand that the Undines were corrupted by the undead curse. That was fine. But he felt as though the traps and the magic circles across the city weren't there just to repel invaders. They were also set up for a specific reason or purpose. That feeling was even stronger after actually infiltrating the city and looking into it further. This isn't a city designed for someone to live in. Rather, it's a fortress city created for a specific purpose. No, that's not it either. Shin Woo was keeping it a secret from his party, but he could overcome the spatial magic at any time. Therefore, he could ignore the spatial magic current, which would otherwise obscure his vision of anything further than 100 meters, and looked at the building in the center of the city. He saw a metal cylinder aimed towards the sky. Every kind of magic circle imaginable was placed on it. That alone was enough to evoke a sense of danger, but even now, Shin Woo could feel various currents of mana being gathered into it. If he ignored the enormous quantity of mana, then it looked like a cannon. It feels like this entire city was sacrificed to complete a weapon. No, it's already complete, but it was left alone for so long that it was heavily modified. A weapon? Yeah. Shin Woo had widened his senses, which had enabled him to see the cannon, as well as something else. He'd felt this mana signature before. Arama Steelworker was over there. He was getting closer and closer to the center of the city, where the cannon was located. Well, he was getting closer and closer, but because of Theotain von Selden's magic, he was going at a very slow pace. I feel another person's magic too. We should really hold a party. So what are you saying? We should quicken our pace. Now isn't the time to be worrying about spirits. So many heroes had gathered in one place, so he thought they'd be able to take care of this easily. However, the heaven-defying general may need to take center stage. Shin Woo shrugged his shoulders and grabbed the map. Redidane just quietly watched him. This way is safe. We'll be fine as long as we go this way. Oh, I thought this spot originally had traps. The traps have been destroyed. Once he'd sensed Arama Steelworker's energy, Shin Woo had volunteered to lead the group. Prince was the first to notice that they progressed at a much faster pace. Junior, what are you doing? For some reason, it's become easier to walk and I'm not as dizzy as before. I was conserving my magic before, so that I wouldn't use more than is strictly necessary, but I felt like I'd missed something important. So I've taken out my secret weapon. Shin Woo said, and with the hand not grasping the map, gripped his delicately made, snow-white bone sword. The faint light that it emitted relaxed his party. Redidane noticed how high the concentration of light was and said, "It's a light element weapon, I see. Yes, as you know, the light element possesses the ability to sever things. This weapon focuses that ability into defense, and it also has a maximized special active skill as well. With this ability, I can remove some of the spatial magic that is meddling with us." Yoo, nice. Prince was pointlessly amazed. However, the weapon didn't actually have an ability like that. It did possess the special passive skill, Death God's Smile, and the special active skill, Death God's Fury, but they were more designed to kill one's opponent. Shin Woo was using his wild card skill as the base and from there, used his light and shining flame elements to eliminate the effects of the spatial magic. Junior, where did you find such an amazing weapon? I got it from the treasure box after beating the boss of a level 7 dungeon. I was really lucky. A level 7 dungeon? He wasn't lying. When he had first entered the dungeon, it was certainly an elite level 7 dungeon. Although, it had become a level 8 dungeon later and the boss was a level 9 Garuda. But it seemed like his lie was still enough to astound his party members. Especially Prince, who was the most shocked. Level 7. Level 7. Ah, please quiet down, senior. Then what level is that weapon? Level 6? Level 7? Wait, it's not. Yes, it is. Level 8. It's just a weapon, but it's a higher level than me. Prince rolled on the floor, mortified. Shin Woo watched on, speechless. Then, Redidane interjected. The fact that you obtained a level 8 weapon, a light element weapon at that. Was the dungeon boss level 8 by any chance? It seemed like it had just become level 8. However, it was indeed level 8. I had to prepare a lot beforehand to take him down. I got some help from the secret shop too. The reason I was out of contact for so long was because I was so busy clearing that dungeon. The boss had, in no way, just become a level 8 feat. And although it had been weakened, it was still a level 9 divine bird that had remained trapped for hundreds of years. Plus, Li Shin Woo had pretty much only bought bones from the secret shop. Since you've taken down 3 of the 12 generals, you must have had plenty of perium. I've never bought expendable equipment from the secret shop before, but if that woman supported you fully, then... Redadane was dumbfounded, yet nodded her head. He was sure that, right now, she was thinking of Plain as a wasteful woman. The misunderstanding between the sisters was deepening, and may even lead to a feud in the future. However, Li Shin Woo decided not to worry about trivial matters. But even so, if you're not strong enough, then it would still be impossible. In other words, Li Shin Woo, are you level 8? He pondered briefly, but there was a chance that he'd have to show a portion of his power in this city. If that's the case, then it would be impossible to hide his level. Li Shin Woo didn't really feel the necessity in hiding it any longer either. Thus, he just honestly nodded his head and said, "Yes, I thought you'd shown us all your tricks, but to think there was even more to you. I'm surprised. You're always showing me something unbelievable." This time, Redadane was actually shocked. It wasn't because she'd come to know that Li Shin Woo was level 8. It was that she hadn't recognized how powerful he was before now. Normally, the level of one's existence is shown freely, and one would need to work tirelessly to hide it. But to her, Li Shin Woo had never shown a level that was similar to hers. "I was level 7 then, Redadane. It was only after that I reached level 8, by going through a variety of experiences. You can trust me. I thought I was the one testing you, but it seems like you were the one testing us all along." "I wasn't testing you. I think of you all as trustworthy comrades." "Ah, that includes Senior Lloyd and Senior Arian as well." "Comrades, comrades." Redadane let that word roll off her tongue a few times and then smiled bitterly, as if she'd just eaten licorice. Li Shin Woo could tell that she was repulsed by the idea and merely smiled. She had been a hero for dozens of years and had gone through every kind of ordeal imaginable, so she may have felt that it was pretentious of him to say, "Redadane, regardless of what you think. Shin Woo, something's coming." "Huh?" But before Li Shin Woo could tell her anything, Kraisha curtly warned him. Spirits. He didn't know what allowed them to move freely without being affected by the spatial magic, but all of the corrupted spirits in the city were coming for them. LV5 corrupted Sylph. LV5 corrupted Salamander. The large force was mostly composed of Sylphs and Salamanders. The fire and wind spirits mixed together, becoming a black storm that came rushing towards them, the sight of which was truly frightening. Spirits were composed of pure elemental mana. This was their greatest feature, and the more spirits there were, the more their power would increase, exponentially. There are tens of thousands of them at least. We'll intercept them. Focus on your magic. Redadane and Kraisha were already poised to intercept them. However, the firestorm was so large that they were akin to a speck of dust. They didn't know what to do to push them back. Unfortunately, the spirits were unaffected by the spatial magic and didn't set off the traps either. On the contrary, they received mana from them and their attacks became even greater than before. Fire Demon, TCH, you should have attacked the other trespassers instead. Prince summoned the Fire Demon much faster than before, perhaps due to her special training with Kraisha, and complained. Then, the coming firestorm that had been coming straight for them began to go astray. Huh? What the hell is that? They found it strange, yet they didn't let their guard down. However, the firestorm went more and more astray. As more time passed, the firestorm completely missed them and ran off into a completely different direction. Then, the firestorm descended. Someone was fighting off the firestorm and gathering their mana. The corrupted Sylphs and Salamanders were truly attacking another invader. Senior, Prince Altania, Li Shin Woo stared blankly at Prince, and the other party members soon followed. Kraisha quietly said, "Prince, when did you learn word magic?" Hee. She wasn't entirely sure what was going on, but since it had gone favorably for them, she decided to bluff. Prince swept her hanging silver hair with one hand and with a haughty expression, declared, "Those spirits definitely changed directions after I spoke up. There's no way you know word magic, but I'm glad the situation was resolved well. We must continue with caution. Li Shin Woo, please continue to lead us." "Okay, let's take the shortest route. Then why did you even praise me in the first place? Hey, are you really going to embarrass me like this?" But the events continued to repeat. While Li Shin Woo nullified the spatial magic and they went full speed ahead towards the center of the city, They sprung a few unavoidable traps. Traps that would randomly draw nearby spirits and traps that summoned monsters out of nowhere. Despite that, the traps had all avoided their party. What's going on? Don't look a gift horse in the mouth. Perhaps they're afraid of the light element? It's possible if my weapon's hidden ability activated, but this is too much. Perhaps another group of trespassers are provoking them that much more. Regardless, we have no choice but to take advantage of this opportunity and go deeper into the city. The party had stubbornly advanced, and the spirits and monsters had taken notice of this. Because they headed for the other invaders, there was a huge commotion within the city. The spirits and monsters slowed the other group's advance, while allowing Shin Woo's group to advance even quicker. They couldn't ask for any better. Is it you? Of course it is. I did it the moment I sensed the other trespassers. Shin Woo shamelessly answered Jin's question and moved his legs. He was obviously using the wild card skill right now. And the element he was using? Dark Shadow. He knew all about the surrounding area, as well as his enemies from afar. With the shadow that loomed over the city, he connected the two together, causing the spirits and monsters to go over to them. This level of twisting cause and effect was child's play. He could achieve such a result by just manipulating cause and effect, so it was indeed suited to be a Joker's innate element. The beginner Dark Shadow element has become LV7 and magic has increased by 20. Oh, it leveled up again. When he'd first entered the city and used Dark Shadow, the innate element had leveled up, but one more hour of distorting cause and effect had caused it to level up again. Shin Woo was looking forward to getting Dark Shadow to the intermediate level. His intermediate Dark Flame was quite powerful as well, but he could only imagine how powerful his innate element would end up being if he were to level it up to the intermediate level. You were already dangerous before, but now that you've gotten an innate element, you're controlling the situation, even though it doesn't look like you're actually doing anything. That's the very definition of a Joker. In the midst of his naive comrades counting their blessings and traversing through the city, Shin Woo and Jin spoke to each other and he smiled wickedly. His poker face should have been perfect, but Kraisha, who had been watching him, looked sullen. Shin Woo, you've started hiding a lot more from me. Really? I think I'm always being honest. When we're alone, prepare yourself. Kraisha, don't threaten my junior. The party bickered, yet continued through the city smoothly. It took another hour before they had arrived before the city walls that divided the inner and outer parts of the city. There existed a high thorn wall that surrounded the palace, which existed at the center of Haida, or the Underground Empire's capital. It was the final defense against any invaders and was around 100 meters tall. It also possessed magical properties that allowed it to sense any intruders that would do its master harm beforehand, as well as stopping them from entering. Was that all? Its defensive capabilities were without peer, and anyone lower than level 8 couldn't damage the wall, regardless of what they did. It might go differently if one uses magic or an element, but pure physical strength and skills wouldn't be able to damage the wall. At this point, it could be considered on the level of an authority. The Thorn Wall's defense was absolute, and only after getting through that wall could the heroes even dream of challenging the Emperor. I didn't think there'd be one here too. A Thorn Wall. I caught a glimpse of it once before. It was at least 80 meters tall, though it does seem smaller than the one in the capital. Last I saw, it wasn't here. Which means it was created later. As I thought, there were rumors that the Empire was undertaking some secret project that was hidden from even the high-rank nobles. As expected, there had to be something important here if the defense was so severe. What was the Emperor thinking? And why was the Spirit Princess so deeply involved in this project? Redidane looked up at the black, sharp-thorned wall in anguish. Shin Woo wasn't hoping for much, but he asked her anyway. If you were a high-rank noble, then you must know a way to easily tear down this wall, no? Number. All I know is that the nobles who opposed the creation of this wall were killed. Sarah, you sure are useless. You're just old. You're not even as helpful as our junior here. Please call me Redidane. Uga. My face. My beautiful face is cracking. Junior. Shin Woo saw Redidane, who was unable to restrain herself, give Prince an iron claw. He then tapped on the thorn wall. It was so tough that he groaned. What exactly is this made of? Evil eye. It's said that this ore is formed by long-term exposure from darkness element magic. It is the source of the darkness element here, which is what allowed the Underground Empire to flourish. It's to my understanding that that ore was mined and used for the creation of the Thorn Wall. Ho, so there was a different source of magic, aside from the Emperor's, that I felt from the capital. Stop talking between yourselves and help me, Junior. It would be hard enough to take on the level 9 Emperor, yet he even had this weapon up his sleeve. The more he learned about this damn underground empire purification quest, the more difficult it got. He was beginning to understand why God was so depressed. In other words, the Thorn Wall is nothing more than a byproduct of that magic source. As I said before, Evil Eye must be exposed to darkness magic for such a long time that we can safely say that this is all they have. I'm actually quite surprised that they even have a Thorn Wall in Byron. When exactly did they make it? They likely constructed it right before the Empire's demise. Please let her go now. She's starting to foam at the mouth. Ah, Redidane let go, and Prince whined. Her eyes seemed to be asking him, why didn't he help earlier? Shin Woo consoled her and then investigated the Thorn Wall. They seemingly placed a great amount of trust in the wall, as there were no traps nearby. When he looked further into it, it was simply because the Thorn Wall would activate on its own and destroy any nearby traps. The Thorn Wall is a fortress in and of itself. So if I were to gather my magic, I'll get attacked? Yep, it's really dangerous, everyone stay back. Shin Woo sensed tremendous energy undulations behind the Thorn Wall. He could feel a large quantity of mana that had been accumulated for dozens of years at the center, as well as a rebellious living energy. Perhaps this was, no, it was definitely a spirit's energy. A city designed for spirits. No, it wasn't. Now that he'd gotten to the center of Byron, he was sure of it. This city wasn't created for spirits. Rather, this city was created to use spirits and to create something with them. Spirit's spring? There was something that lay dormant inside that didn't suit such a peaceful and gentle environment. Perhaps it hadn't been able to sleep in the first place. The Spirit General, or the Spirit Princess. Either way, she's not in the best of shape. And he was certain that the Spirit General and Redidane were deeply involved in the past. If we go in like this, won't it just turn into a melodrama? Shin Woo thought and sighed deeply. While investigating the mana, he also looked for the location of the other trespassers. Because he'd activated the traps, through the traps, the spirits and monsters attacked the other trespassers, who had no recollection of ever setting off those traps. They were progressing as slow as a turtle. But, there's another group coming from the north. Who was it? That was obvious. It was probably a force sent by the Emperor after he'd noticed the commotion. Though they hadn't entered the city as of yet, he was sure they were coming to Byron based on their direction and speed. And thus, the elite heroes, Anti-Skull, Orema Steelworkers Golem Force, as well as the Imperial troops had gathered in one place. Everyone, gather up, let's talk. Alright, it's time for my brilliant brain to go to work. I'll show you the location of the other invaders on the map. I also have a general idea as to where the Spirit General is. But the problem's the Imperial troops that are coming down to Byron as we speak. Shin Woo, your mana detection is abnormal. If you're bitter about it, then get to level 8 too. Kook. Shin Woo placed 4 dots on the map. He could identify Orema Steelworkers' magic, so he knew where Anti-Skull and the Golem's forces were. But he was worried about the forces that came from the capital. They were far away, but for some reason, he was familiar with this presence. Their presence was faint, such that if he stopped focusing he felt like he'd lose sight of the presence. A faint presence? No way. Redidane looked at the quickly approaching dot, gritted her teeth and yelled. Golden Shadow. Velen von Dorth is coming with the Emperor's personal intelligence unit. Golden Shadow. I think I've heard that somewhere before. It's an organization that consists of people who are stealthy and quick on their feet. By the Emperor's command, they wander across the Empire in secret and collect information for him. They're also famous for eliminating anyone who opposes the Empire without anyone ever knowing. So they're assassins. Now he remembered. A long time ago, when Shin Woo was having so much fun, destroying cities, the Lord had misunderstood and thought he was part of the Golden Shadow. Considering the fact that the Golden Shadow was the Emperor's personal hit squad, he could completely understand the Lord's reaction. But wait a second, did you say Dorth? Yes, Velen von Dorth. He's the Dorth clan's firstborn. Their family has a long history of being a shadow clan. Back then, Both brothers were chosen to become a part of the 12 generals, which was the topic of conversation at the time. That reaction. Did you perhaps? Yes. I killed his younger brother. Junior. Lately, your personality's really starting to show in your voice. The Golden Shadow General, Velen von Dorth. He was the Lightning Shadow General's older brother, and apparently, he was more skilled than his younger brother in several ways. Perhaps he could completely assimilate with his shadow. Shadow, huh? That man's dangerous. He's incredibly fast and stealthy. It's difficult to detect him, even if he's right in front of you. In a way, he may be more dangerous than the Archmage, Theotane von Seldin. This is troubling. We may be able to take him down if we work together, but if we're attacked by the other forces, then I suppose it won't be such a pleasant experience. Alright, let's formulate a plan. What plan? A plan that makes all the forces inside the city fight and destroy each other. It really was a Li Shin Woo-esque thing to say. Kracia and Jin nodded their heads as if expecting him to say that, but Prince and Redidane looked on vacantly. If that were so easy, then there would be nothing to think about. How would you? It's easy. Now that you mention it, this city is filled with traps, monsters, and spirits. If we can figure out how they're organized, then all we need to do is gradually lead the forces to them. Let's say you lead the other forces to the traps. What are you going to do about the Imperial troops? They know this city inside and out. I'll just draw them out myself. I can do that much. Li Shin Woo said confidently, and Redidane was so speechless that she slapped her forehead. You heard me, right? There's a chance that the Golden Shadow General is with them. Your abilities are remarkable, but you'll die if you're ambushed. You said that that guy could melt into shadows, right? That's right. He can assimilate with his element, a possessor of a transcendent ability that only a handful of people in the Empire. Redidane stopped right in the middle. Kracia and Prince were the same. Li Shin Woo's hand had also melted into the darkness. I also possess such a transcendent ability. There's a chance I won't be taken out. Please trust me. How can this be? Shin Woo, Jr., where did you even come from? Are you really my junior? While Kracia and Redidane remained dumbfounded, Prince, with a worried expression, walked over to Li Shin Woo and pulled his cheek. She'd never pulled his cheek before, so there was no way that she could confirm whether he was the real deal or not. But he was well aware that she was truly concerned for him. I said I went through a level 7 dungeon. I couldn't clear it without getting this strong. Is that all? Redidane suddenly asked, her eyes tinged with suspicion. Are you cooperating with someone right now? In other words, like that undead who told us about the heaven-defying general. Yes, you're right. Li Shin Woo answered nonchalantly, and Redidane furrowed her brows. As I thought, I was suspicious when you said you were coming to Byron alone, but the fact that they're not around means that. No, are you trying to be considerate? It'll be troublesome if both sides were to fight. That was the right call. I told you that your decision was right, but I don't have the confidence to hold myself back in front of them. However, my thought process hasn't changed. You cannot trust them completely. You've acquired power, so I trust that you won't be taken down by unforeseen circumstances. Redidane was still the same as always. When he mentioned the heaven-defying general, Li Shin Woo was worried that Redidane would enter her psycho mode, but it turned out better than he'd expected. He smiled faintly and tried to convince her once more. Let's call it a win-win. No harm will come to us, so long as their goal to kill the Emperor remains the same. Undead with a clear goal. That's what makes them so scary. Huh? Nothing. Never mind. Redidane's voice quieted down halfway through, and Li Shin Woo pretended like he couldn't hear her. Everyone knew how scary the undead were. On the contrary, Li Shin Woo was perhaps the one who knew best. If they help us, then you may be able to draw out the Imperial troops as well. You drawing them out and forcing them to clash against the heaven-defying general's troops is another issue entirely, but it seems like we have no choice but to try. No, I'm going to draw them out by myself. I'll be enough. You guys should do something else in the meantime. Something else. Beyond this, Li Shin Woo extended one hand and pointed towards the thorn wall. He circled the location of the giant cannon and the spirit general and said, "We force them to fight and then we get what they came for. Whether it's the anti-skull or the golems, there's something that they want here. If we can, we steal it, and if we can't, then we destroy it. Please take care of that, seniors." Even if they followed his instructions, there was still a problem. They hadn't gotten through the thorn wall yet. That's why they had stopped here in the first place. I have an idea. While they were talking amongst themselves, Shin Woo had thought up some ways to get through the thorn wall with his party. But Kraisha's eyes were sparkling, so he decided to hear her out first. I analyzed the thorn wall and found that the ore would temporarily overlap its defense and durability in the specific area whenever it is attacked, nullifying the damage. Hey, wait, that's ridiculous. Darkness signified a link. By using this power, the ores were pieced together. The secret behind the thorn wall's formidable defense lay in gathering ore which possessed similar characteristics, assimilating them together, and overlapping them together. Now that you mention it, this is indeed the power of darkness. I understand now. A magician's deductive ability is quite surprising. This is basic for a magician. Prince is still below average. Kook. Of course, Shin Woo already knew all this. His peak darkness element mastery wasn't just for show. If Shin Woo were alone, he could have just forced his way through the wall. Then why is it that level 8 or lower physical attacks can't damage the wall? You need to think about it in reverse. A level 8's physical attacks can somewhat ignore the darkness element surrounding the evil eye ore. An attack that messes with the wall's overlapping defense will inflict damage. As I thought, Shin Woo understood what she meant, as he had gone through several changes when he'd reached level 8. Yeah, that's right, he hadn't felt anything unusual, as he could use several elements and had even unlocked a few innate elements as well, but level 8 was a large leap towards a higher realm. I hadn't realized because everything else I'd gotten was so amazing. But now that I know, it's fine. Since it'll make wildcard, which lets me define myself, better than before. If he really wanted to, he could unleash a physical attack that defied physics, so Kraisha's deduction was spot on. Shin Woo nodded his head and Kraisha continued. I've thought of 3 ways. First, we take advantage of the limitation of the thorn wall's overlapping defense. We attack in 2 places at once. One person attacks the same spot, and the other uses that opportunity to unleash a quick and powerful attack on the wall. As long as the overlapping darkness element doesn't react, then the second attacker should be able to damage a portion of the wall. A good plan. The fact that its defensive capabilities were assimilated and overlapped meant that the wall focused all of its defense at one point at a time. It didn't just take that defense from nowhere. In other words, if one person were to attack one place, forcing the wall to overlap its defenses in that specific area, then another person could attack and damage the wall before the concentration of defense could shift to the new area. Second, I use my ice. Ice is, at its core, based around death and change. My magic freezes everything and in the process, can make everything move slower as well. Mana, as well as these ores' overlapping ability, are no exception. Therefore, if I make the wall respond slower than normal, then we should be able to get through without much difficulty. Of course, it would take an immense amount of mana to do so. Cool. I'm always cool. If all the heroes were like Kraisha, then they would have conquered the underground empire already. Shin Woo looked at Kraisha as if deeply moved, and experienced Jin's rodeo. This was quite the bold move for a woman who'd wondered whether she was qualified or not. Lastly, we use light. I don't think I even need to explain this. That's right. After listening to you, I've gotten the gist of it. Redadane agreed as if the answer were obvious. The mace end of her flail was already accumulating a bright white light. It was clear that she had transcended human limitations, as she could create the light element. Light is the power of severing. It goes without saying that it can sever things that have been connected through the darkness element. But because I cannot even begin to comprehend the concentration of darkness magic that has gathered in this wall. Even I, who can use such powerful light, am not confident that I can break through it by myself. That's why I told you all the options. We'll mix all 3 of them together. That was the most effective method, especially because they were pressed for time. Kraisha stretched out 3 fingers. Seeing that, Redadane nodded her head in understanding. As expected, Shin Woo will attack the wall first, forcing the wall to concentrate its defenses in a different location. And during that time, you'll use your ice magic. Then, I'll use my light magic to its fullest in that area. If we do that, then we should be able to get through the thorn wall. We'll be able to break through only a portion of it. There's a chance that it can regenerate. If we can get in, Then getting out shouldn't be too difficult. I see. There was indeed a way to break through the thorn wall. Redidane was deeply moved at the realization that they could combine their power to break through the thorn wall. Many years ago, when she was still young, she remembered seeing the chaotic form of the thorn wall and being unable to do anything but latch on to her older brother. Let's begin. Shin Woo, you have the toughest job. Can we leave it to you? Of course. If Shin Woo were to help Redidane with his own light element, they would be able to break through the thorn wall with ease. Shin Woo didn't say anything, but the party seemed to think that he was putting in a lot of effort just to wield the shining bone sword. They didn't even suspect that Shin Woo could masterfully wield the shining bone sword's light element and cut through the thorn wall alone. Forget the light element, I could use the shining flame to outright erase the thorn wall's karma. Shin Woo decided to humor them and stepped forward, gripping the sword with both hands. He didn't even need to gather his mana. With but a thought, the world's mana would come to his aid. Plus, there was already a significant amount of mana within the sword itself. I'm ready. Tell me when you're all ready. I'm ready as well. Not yet. Just a little while longer. Done. Shin Woo nodded his head and silently thrust his sword. His sword pierced through the wall with ease, as if he were slicing through butter. Since the light element was attached to every one of his attacks, the wall was unable to activate its defensive ability at the moment of impact. But right after, he could feel its incredible toughness. While Shin Woo's attack possessed transcendent strength, the thorn wall's own defense was transcendent as well. It's better than I expected. Darkness's ability of assimilation. They had developed this ability into an overlapping ability. He could see the wall gathering all of the evil Ior's strength into one place so that it could crush the sword. What a tremendous flow. The energy being overlapped into this space could even hurt the Garuda. Even if they're rotten, they're still the Empire, huh? Shin Woo saw as the darkness that comprised the wall move around and smiled automatically. There was so much he learned from seeing that. He'd reached the peak of the darkness element, but it didn't mean he'd mastered every facet of using it. Overlap. What a good idea. Now, I'm going. Up. While Shin Woo was experiencing the thorn wall's ability firsthand and analyzing it, Kraisha had burst a portion of the wall with her ice magic. She cast a small blizzard with her violently rotating orb and temporarily halted the wall's overlapping function. Then, Redidane's flail exploded with light. She let out a battle cry and a portion of the wall collapsed. Shin Woo, you can stop now. We have to go in now. Shin Woo, will you really be okay? I have someone working with me. On the contrary, I'm more worried about you. That nonchalant expression. Very good. Leave the inside to us. Shin Woo, you have to tell me everything later. Good luck, Junior. If you die, I'll kill you. Shin Woo watched as his party, aside from him and Jin, rushed through the opening, and then withdrew his sword. The area he pulled the sword out of seemed to emit an unbecoming scream and caused an uproar in the entire area. At the same time, darkness thorns were formed in the damaged area, which attempted to punish the intruder, but the moment they touched his body, the thorns completely fell apart. What do you think you're doing? It almost seems harder hiding that ability than using it. Still, it's like I've stopped being human. You stopped being human a while ago. Once the party was gone, Jin spoke. Shin Woo just grinned and replied. And he picked up the remains of the thorn wall. Its name was indeed, Evil Eye. Each piece was only a level 6 piece of ore, so he couldn't believe that altogether it formed such a tremendous artifact. So the more pieces that are gathered, the more powerful it gets. But instead of overlapping the properties in emergencies only, why not overlap matter itself? What a crazy idea. What happened to the conversation of mass? When I first came here, he, died, along with my body. Shin Woo tried to apply the technique he just learned with his own darkness magic, applying it to the thorn wall's debris. He thought it'd be really tough to do, but he was able to condense the debris into the size of a bean with ease, perhaps because he, who'd mastered the darkness element, had seen the ability firsthand and understood its fundamental principles. Aha! So this is the real way of using this ore. You don't overlap the magic together, you overlap the matter itself together instead. You're not supposed to make this stupid wall with it. Of course, in the process of overlapping matter, it became heavier as well, but it was still lighter than combining the weight of all the debris. The conservation truly was dead. What was so special about this ability? Well, if he were to gather all the evil eye in one place, then he would be able to create the world's heaviest and most durable artifact with the highest magic concentration. Does the undead emperor know this too? I'm excited. So are you going to break this whole thing down? Are you crazy? This thing will become the last bastion that stops the others from entering. I'll do it after it's done its job. He wondered what he would have to do if the hole wasn't mended, but it had completely regenerated, though he didn't know where the additional material had come from. He tapped on the once collapsed area and found that it was as tough as ever. Good. Then we're all good to go. Shin Woo placed the level 6+7 evil eye bean into his chest, grinned and turned around. The Kai Pauls had already lined up in front of him. Including the original Kai Paul, there were 5 level 7 elites. They feared nothing. You called for us, so we came. What shall we do? What do you mean? We do what we do best. Shin Woo checked the location of all the forces one last time. He'd already memorized where all the traps were, as well as where the monsters and spirits were. Our goal is to confuse our enemies, cause them to lose their way, cause them to fight against each other, and lose sight of their goals and themselves. Basically, just make a mess of things. Today, we're killing 4 of the 12 generals. Understood, Kai Paul yelled vigorously. The others needed no explanation. When Shin Woo had completely mastered the darkness element, he had become able to directly transmit his thoughts to his subordinates. His subordinates went everywhere. It was time to raise the curtains for the heaven-defying general's performance. Chapter 45, Heaven-Defying General's Stage. Shin Woo first followed the golem's presence. If he wanted everything to go as planned, then he'd need to make contact with them first. He and his party had run through the city without stopping, and he'd roughly recorded info on the city, which made it easier to use his wildcard skill. Shin Woo and Jin, who melted into the city's darkness, resembled shadows as they ran with such speed and secrecy. But Jin, who was running at full speed, wasn't feeling very good. I know it's assimilation, but it's strange because it feels like I'm stuck to the ground. We have no choice. Your lightspeed sprint is way too conspicuous. Damn it. They quickly found their objective. Shin Woo and Jin had met him a few times before. The elite level 7 golem, Guillotine Steelworker, was leading many level 6 golems in breaking through the traps. They were blazing a trail through the minefield, so to speak, using their bodies as a sacrifice. Be strong. We're slowly getting closer to our destination. Yes, sir. Some of the traps we haven't set off keep summoning spirits and monsters. Who is it? Shin Woo and Jin hid within the building's side post, but when the time was right, he released his assimilation with the darkness and came forward. Guillotine, who hadn't been able to sense him before he exposed himself, was shocked and pointed his spear at him. A level 7 elite just wasn't enough to threaten him anymore. What did you come here for, golem? Why you are? Guillotine glared at him. Did he recall Shin Woo's black armor? While hiding within the shadows, Shin Woo's armor was replaced with the element, and the imposing horse he was riding? He exerted even more pressure into the spear. Paul Zero, were you the heaven-defying general? A lot of you called me that. Shin Woo confidently nodded his head. He'd introduced himself as Paul Zero in front of Arema Steelworker and Guillotine in the past, but they wouldn't think that he was the same undead as before. After all, his growth rate was astounding, even to him. You've finally shown your true colors. There was a lot I wanted to ask you. To think you'd use your subordinate to spy on us and expose us to the Imperial Army. Oh, Shin Woo briefly looked through his memories and as though he'd remembered, soon replied in a sluggish voice. Now that you mention it, that did happen. Yeah, it did. I ordered my subordinate to do that. So how about it? Did you get into contact with Anti-Skull after that? Considering how they're here too, it seems like you've gotten quite friendly with each other. You bastard? That's right. In the past, before he'd fought against the Lightning Shadow General, Hansen von Dorth, he'd first impersonated Kadinan's satellite city, Lord Nelopa, and had sent a false report that the Golden General, Arema Steelworker and Sigald von Rededane's Anti-Skull had joined forces and were attacking the city. Following that event, the Imperial Army became wary of both Arema Steelworker and Anti-Skull, forcing the golems and Anti-Skull out of hiding. It seemed like Guillotine was under the impression that Shin Woo had ordered a subordinate to carry out his plan under his name, but unfortunately, Shin Woo had executed the plan himself. Who do you work for? How can you, a mere undead, do such a thing? I'm sick of questions like that. I don't work for anyone. I just do what I want. Unlike you guys, who are just the Magic Emperor's faithful hunting dogs. So how long do I have to wait here before Arama Steelworker arrives? If you want to keep me here, then say something more exciting. Guillotine Steelworker was speechless. Shin Woo was exaggerating a yawn, and Guillotine kept opening and closing his mouth, but he eventually managed to say something. Did you know from the very beginning? What are you planning? Planning? Don't say something so sad. I just don't want to lose your forces for nothing. You've already expended some of your forces getting through these traps. A good general values his soldiers' lives. Am I wrong? How are you so good at cutting down a person's self-confidence? Hey, the way you said, so good, sounded a bit weird? While Shin Woo and Jin communicated via telepathy, Guillotine's body shook. A golem can shake when they become level 7? Shin Woo asked, only to notice Guillotine's shaking starting to intensify. Shin Woo was shocked. You'll regret it, our lord will soon be here with the remainder of the 4 heavenly commanders. I know how strong you are, but we'll see how relaxed you are after they come. Oh man, I'm so scared. No matter how strong I am, I have no plans on fighting the level 8 Golden General. Do you want to talk? It's already too late. By becoming an undead, it seems that in exchange for your strength, your brains rotted away. It's too late to feel regret. Guillotine, are you alright? My lord. In the midst of Shin Woo playing around with Guillotine, several golems rushed onto the premises, accompanied by powerful energy being shot towards Shin Woo. While its power was significantly reduced due to the countless traps nearby, it was still a concentrated blast of a level 8 Zamana, so it was enough to cause Shin Woo to worry. A shield? But the energy he'd shot out, it was probably metal element mana, was blocked by a shield that came out of nowhere, causing it to vanish. Did you really think I wouldn't be prepared when I've come all this way to meet the Golden General? The shield was the level 7 Titan's fortress and was one of the 17 weapons that Shin Woo had summoned and fully charged. Seeing that, Arama Steelworker was shocked. Shin Woo saw him take a step back and nodded his head. With just one move, Arama Steelworker had realized that Shin Woo was level 8. Though Shin Woo could perform such a move when he was level 7 as well. The heaven-defying general, I have heard of you. A hidden dragon that appeared just recently. I didn't think we'd meet like this. I've met you once before. Don't you remember? You mean that subordinate of yours. He had potential. I see that he takes after his master in terms of guts and talent. Even if he told him that he was Paul Zero, it was unlikely that Arama Steelworker would believe him. Shin Woo shrugged his shoulders and decided to make the first move. So why are you here? Is this what the Magic Emperor wants? So you know. You must have come from the surface as well. Shin Woo could feel an invisible pressure tightening around him on all sides. When one becomes level 8, they gain the ability to influence the mana around them and control it, a type of authority. Perhaps because it originated from a golem, the ambient mana took on a metallic property that smelled of blood. It seemed to be a derivative of the earth element, much like the wood element, but it seemed more independent from the source. Perhaps it was a specialized element that could only be obtained when one becomes a golem. When he had last felt Arama Steelworker's strength, he had tried his best to act unfazed, but now, he wasn't the least bit affected. He could match that pressure. No, he could go even further beyond it. To him, he saw Arama Steelworker's action as just a waste of mana. I don't know how much you know, or who you're working for. But what I am sure of is that you're a threat to my master. You wanted something, so you came all the way here, but it's quite unfortunate. I'll kill you where you stand. Arama Steelworker gathered a tremendous amount of energy into his fist. According to his calculations, Arama Steelworker was using the metal element mana to temporarily increase his durability and reinforce himself as well. It was as though he was making his body into the most powerful weapon. The 4 heavenly commanders behind him exerted incredible strength as well. At this rate, he would have to fight against them. Since he really didn't want to fight them, he quickly took out the anti-Arama Steelworker weapon he'd brought from the surface. At that moment, Arama Steelworker sounded as though he'd caught a bug of some sort and stood still. The tremendous mana that he'd gathered was released and gently disappeared amongst the mass of golems. The other golems were the same. They rubbed their eyes, as if they couldn't believe what was happening, blinked, or even tapped their heads to confirm that what was happening was real. However, it didn't change anything. That, Arama Steelworker's voice quivered. The golden general that had been so imposing when they'd first met was no longer here. He was acting like a cowardly middle schooler who had just been caught writing a poem at the corner of their notes about their first love. How do you have that? How the hell do you have that? I wonder, why don't you use your brain? If not, then why don't we ask the servants of the Steelworker family? You bastard, Paul Zero? Paul Zero? Ah, that's right. Shin Woo sounded regretful as if he'd just remembered something. If you return to the surface like that, your servants might run away in fear. Isn't that right? You bastard, I'll kill you, Go ahead and try. Arama Steelworker's body shook and then went, thud. He took a step forward and raised his hand, but Shin Woo extended the ultimate weapon, and he stopped once more. This was so fun. Why is the Lord? Why? How? Ah, I have yours too, so don't feel left out. Yours were broken up, but the security was all the same. It wasn't such a good idea to record it in the Golem network, now was it? The information hidden on the Golem network is only accessible by myself and His Majesty. There's absolutely no way that an outsider can access it. There's no such thing as an absolute in this world. Shin Woo smiled sweetly. Whenever he used the ultimate weapon, Arama Steelworker would flinch. If he could, he would play around a little bit longer, but even now, Anti-Skull and the Imperial Army were coming to the city. He needed to negotiate with them if he wanted the time that Kai Paul and his forces had bought him to not go to waste. Now, Golden General, are you willing to hear me out now? I want to kill you, but... His words, that of a level 8 golem, were so frightening that it almost seemed like he would be cursed. But Shin Woo didn't pay it any mind. Soon, he heard exactly what he wanted to hear. I'll hear what you have to say. We can finally talk. What a joyous occasion. But promise me that you'll give it back. Me and my subordinates' precious bodies. Oh, but of course. If you do exactly as I say, that is. Shin Woo sounded so sure of himself that only Jin could think that, this asshole's lying again. He replied and shook Arama Steelworker's level 8 human body. That's right. When Arama Steelworker had left the surface and had placed himself into a golem, he had left his physical body in his family's safe house, so that he could one day return to his original body. And once he'd figured that out, Shin Woo had snatched their bodies in order to use them as his ultimate weapon against them. We've exchanged communications with Anti-Skull a few times. We've also forged a temporary alliance as well. What do you know about its leader? Not much, but I do know that he disagrees with Jizahanu. Jizahanu. That was the first time he'd heard that name from someone other than the goddess when she'd first summoned and explained the situation to him. He was not only the Undead Empire's emperor but was also the second prince that was exiled from the surface. Jizahanu had immersed himself in research, in an attempt to one day return to the surface, but was consequently the very person that had trapped all of his people underground. He was against Jizahanu's research from the very beginning. It was the first time he, the Emperor's sword, had disobeyed him. And he ultimately created a separate organization without the Emperor's knowledge. To this day, I'm not entirely sure what his true intentions are. But you're working together for now because you both oppose the Undead Emperor. That's right, and because he's undead, he wouldn't be able to change anything by himself, no matter what his intentions were. Arama Steelworker said as he gazed at Shin Woo. His eyes seemed to ask, but how is it that you're doing this, and are you truly undead? Shin Woo just ignored his questioning gaze and asked, then why did you come to Byron with them all of a sudden? What made you come here, knowing that you'd provoke the Imperial Army and meet with human beings that are still living and breathing? That's, Shin Woo tilted his head and shook Arama Steelworker's body, the soulless one. Seeing that, Arama Steelworker responded post-haste. There's a magical weapon at the center of Byron that was built to destroy the barrier. We were planning on using that to strike the Undead Emperor. Aha, he'd solved the puzzle. This city was supposedly built for spirits and they had even brought in the Spirit General, Princess, to help. Ultimately, This was another one of the Emperor's experiments that would allow him to go outside. The Spirit General, Dana von Etleber, is the possessor of a powerful authority that compels spirits to follow her. In the past, the Emperor hypothesized that they would be able to destroy the barrier by using her power to accumulate all of the spirit's power in one place. Byron was constructed so that she could use her power to its fullest. Impressive. Whether it be the Magic Empire or the Underground Empire, neither of them really cared about the spirits. The second prince merely cooperated with the spirits, as their positions were the same, but they'd never gone out of their way to help them. So they tricked them. They drew them to the city, telling them that they were creating a paradise for spirits when they were actually using them as a power source for a barrier-breaking weapon. That's right, it was impossible for the princess to do alone, but combined with the Emperor's obsession in highly advanced magic engineering, they almost brought it to fruition. This city was brought about through magic engineering, though it's still a bit behind the surfaces. The Dryads had implored him to meet with Dana von Etleber, foolishly believing that meeting her would solve everything when. If so, Shin Woo sported a crooked smile. Of course, he really wasn't blaming the undead emperor. On the contrary, he actually wanted to applaud him for doing everything he could to return to the surface. But it was funny, that all that hard work had been for nothing. That the weapon that the emperor had created to escape was being used against him. So you're going to aim that cannon at the capital and fire it. Paul Zero, you should feel it too. That magical tool's power is no joke, it's been untouched, accumulating energy for dozens of years. If it hits the capital, then even the emperor won't remain unscathed. It seems like Jizahenu realized this too, seeing as how he sent one of the 12 generals, but it's already too late. He won't be able to stop it. As I thought. You plan on taking on the undead emperor directly. Who do you think is to blame for that? That's right, it was all Shin Woo's fault. Originally, Urema Steelworker was only ordered to watch the underground empire. Because the undead weren't capable of change and had no means of coming to the surface, all he had to do was watch them. At least, that's all he should have had to do. But you made them aware of our existence. They've begun obsessing over us. We had no choice but to come out of hiding, if for no other reason than to protect the location of our base. To think that his tactic, which he hadn't put much thought into, had been this effective. Shin Woo realized that this chain of events was truly his fault and couldn't help but marvel at what he had done. I didn't completely understand the undead at the time, so I didn't want to be the only one who took the fall and just wanted to make a mess of things. At this point, Shin Woo started to make some assumptions, but the undead were indeed entities that acted in order to maintain the status quo. The undead emperor, Jizahenu, as well as the undead in the capital likely followed this principle. In other words, they were acting in order to preserve the emperor's authority. Thus, they had designated Urema Steelworker and his golems as a high-level threat and looked into them, as they had killed the Lightning Shadow General, even though it was Shin Woo, and had cleared out the secret production facility, also Shin Woo. At this rate, their base would eventually be discovered, so Urema Steelworker decided that they would risk fighting head-on in order to keep the location and the existence of their base a secret. So, they had forged an alliance with Anti-Skull and had begun to move. Then what about the humans? The humans, the heroes will divert Jizahanu's attention from us. As expected, good insight, but you could have joined forces with them too. They'd be expendable. I've seen Sarah von Redidane before, but I was disappointed. Yes, she can use the light element. But she can't overcome the Emperor, let alone the Archmage. The magicians were promising, but once they reached the capital's stronghold, they would need at least dozens of years to get through. Expendable, huh? It was easy to understand. Shin Woo inwardly smiled bitterly. He felt the exact same way about the golems. After that, Shin Woo asked a few more questions regarding their position and the current situation. Once he'd gathered enough information, Shin Woo nodded his head and wrapped everything up by clapping his hands. Now that we know enough about each other, let's work together to reach our goal. You won't even show your face. How impudent. Let's join up with Anti-Skull, shall we? If our goal of killing the Emperor aligns, then we could form a good relationship with them. Do you really think that man will trust you? Shin Woo just ignored him and formulated a plan. In response, Urema Steelworker retorted. It had been a while since the Metal General's overwhelming pressure had disappeared. Shin Woo just shrugged his shoulders and said, "If it turns south, then I'll just have to rely on the Metal General's strength, now won't I?" "You bastard." If he managed to recruit the Metal General and Anti-Skull and attack the Emperor together, then he wouldn't need to do anything more. He would make the three forces destroy each other, and in the aftermath, the heaven-defying general's troops could clean up what remained. If he were to then kill the Magic Emperor after that, in tandem with the heroes, then that would be ideal. Of course, Shin Woo was sure that things wouldn't go so smoothly. "I need to get rid of the hero's deep-seated hatred of the undead." He turned his gaze towards the frontrunner of that hatred, Sarah von Rededane, who was heading towards the center of the city and sighed. She would personally confront the Metal General or the Annihilation Flame Sword God if she were to see them, so he'd sent the heroes inside, but even now, he wondered whether that was the right call or not. Sup, it can't be helped. Whether it's the Metal General, the Golden Shadow General, or the Annihilation Flame General, it'll be fine as long as I handle them. They should be able to take on the Spirit General, who's been stuck here for dozens of years. But why do I feel uneasy now that I've thought that? Shin Woo, who'd secured the allegiance of the Metal General, followed the traces of Anti-Skull, which had entered the city. In the process, he spoke to Kai Paul through telepathy and ordered them to hold the Imperial troops back. "Lord Paul Zero, please tell me one thing. If we have to fight against Arama Steelworker, could you give me the honor of killing him myself? I promise. When the time comes, I'll leave it to you. Thank you very much." Hearing that, the Kai Pauls moved more quickly than before, as if they'd self-buffed themselves through their revenge. As ordered, the Kai Pauls activated the traps here and there, and led the Imperial troops into them. This would slow the Imperial army down, no matter how secretly they were moving. Of course, Shin Woo hadn't made that promise willy-nilly. He was hoping that Kai Paul would come out stronger than before after killing the one who'd made him like this, like Shino Rendu when he'd absorbed the Mercenary King's bone. If all goes well, then he may reach level 8 before Shino Rendu. No, more importantly, Shin Woo sensed a familiar mana reaction and nodded his head. He was sure of it. It was Anti-Skull. Despite them being harassed by the Kai Pauls just a short while ago, their troops were as imposing as ever. Moreover, he sensed several level 7s in the middle of their force. As I thought, he has enough power to take on the Emperor alone. When the Rededane family was banished, their power was second only to Jizahanu and are likewise descendants of the royal family. Arama Steelworker said nonchalantly, "How kind. He would definitely keep him around a little more before Kai Paul killed him." "Arama, kook." Shin Woo gave a brief and concise order. Arama Steelworker gritted his teeth, stepped forward, and revealed himself. Anti-Skull, which had split up into several groups, stiffened right then and there. Metal General, at the center, a knight exerting the most pressure amongst them stepped forward. He was garbed in a full suite of plate armor, but the goblin fire that seeped through his visor proved that he was an undead. But he wasn't Sigald von Rededane. He was a level 7 elite, Tarion von Rededane. "Let's group up. There's been a problem that I have to explain to you guys." "A problem? Wait a sec, is that man?" Shin Woo belatedly stepped forward. Tarion was shocked upon realizing who he was. Shin Woo softly raised one hand and introduced himself. "I'm Paul Zero. I wanted to thank you on behalf of my subordinates." The heaven-defying general. Although he'd introduced himself amicably, Tarion remained shocked. No, he was actually exerting a significant amount of pressure. "Enough. They'll be of great help to me and your Anti-Skull." "Metal General, are you sure?" It was momentarily silent. A short while later, he slowly nodded his head. "All right, we don't have time. I suppose we have to take all the help we can get, even if it means getting help from the devil himself." "Who? Good thinking." Shin Woo narrowed his eyes. He was in his skeleton form, so he didn't have eyes, and smiled. For a moment, Tarion hadn't controlled himself and had let his killing intent slip out, but there was no way Shin Woo would let that go unnoticed. Does he hate me for stealing his subordinates? No, that wouldn't be enough too. If Anti-Skull were truly an organization devoted to killing the Emperor, then there was no reason for them to kill him, the heaven-defying general, especially because he could help them. Since Shin Woo had only done things that would be harmful to the Emperor as the heaven-defying general. Them becoming undead and going crazy didn't fit either, since that wouldn't explain their actions thus far. There's something more important here that I'm not getting. To Anti-Skull, to Sigald von Rededane. What if Anti-Skull's objective wasn't killing the Emperor? Shin Woo organized his thoughts and his lips twitched. Unfortunately for them, only Shin Woo had the ability to sense their hidden feelings. The Golden Shadow General, he has quite the troublesome ability. But his bones will be buried in this city today. I don't really like that expression. You gotta eat all the way down to the bone too. The pressure exerted by Tyrion von Rededane's anti-skull force. There were 3 level 7 elites including him, 15 level 6 elites, and 500 normal level 6s. And Arama Steelworkers' metal army, which consisted of the 4 heavenly commanders, level 7 elites, and 200 level 6 elite golems. But Shin Woo was all alone. He was, of course, with the level 8 Jin, but to everyone else, Jin just looked like a strong warhorse. Arama Steelworker then asked, "What about your subordinates? They're doing their own thing. They're keeping the Golden Shadow General busy." What? Shin Woo had only brought along his Kai Paul squad, which only consisted of 31 Kai Pauls. However, there were 5 level 7 elites among them, and the rest were level 6 elites at the cusp of level 7, so his force was no pushover. Shin Woo spoke so nonchalantly that both Anti-Skull and the Metal Army felt tense. "We're all on the same side now, right? Don't be so tense. My boys won't be able to stop the Golden Shadow General on their own. So, that's why I'm asking for your help." That's true, as expected of the heaven-defying general. Unlike his reply, his expression indicated no signs of understanding. In the midst of the heavy silence, the two forces exchanged glances. Shin Woo had forced Anti-Skull and the Metal Army into an uneasy alliance, so there was no way they'd be pleased. "So long as I possess the golems' bodies, there's no way they'll attack me first." But Anti-Skull doesn't know that yet. He didn't know why, but for some reason, Anti-Skull was hostile towards him, and he didn't want this situation to drag on forever. Tyrion would probably try to consult with Arama when Shin Woo wasn't looking, and if he fails, he would obviously fail. There was a chance that their alliance would break apart. If there's no way of bringing Anti-Skull over to my side, then it wouldn't be such a bad idea to make them fight against the golems. Although he was working together with them, Shin Woo's brain was still busy. He also couldn't keep the golems on his side forever. Before they tried something in an attempt to regain their bodies from him, he would need to find the right time to kill them. How could I take care of them without them noticing? Shin Woo wondered, and then asked Tyrion von Rededane, who hadn't been able to fully conceal his killing intent. "The Annihilation Flame Sword God isn't with you?" He didn't come. He had something more important to do. This is an important assignment. As his representative, my abilities and position are sufficient. Sufficient abilities and position, huh? He probably wasn't wrong. Although Tyrion von Rededane couldn't match Arama Steelworker, he was definitely stronger than Arama's 4 heavenly commanders. But unlike Arama, who personally led his metal army, Anti-Skull's leader hadn't come, which felt a bit off. Shin Woo directed his questioning gaze at Guillotine, and Guillotine just shrugged his shoulders. "We'll ask them later, but the alliance isn't as solid as you'd think." It seemed as though Anti-Skull wasn't the only one with trust issues. He wondered. It could be the truth, but perhaps the golems were dissatisfied with Shin Woo, as he held the noose around their necks, and were just hiding their true feelings. "I feel like it'll be fine, no matter how the situation turns, but I suppose I should send Kracia a message first." Once he'd simply explained the situation to her, he looked over the Anti-Skull squad once more. Unlike the undead he'd awakened, the Anti-Skull's undead emitted a familiar type of mana. Shin Woo wondered what it was but soon found the answer. "It's light." That's right. Although Anti-Skull had experimented with a variety of poisons, he sensed traces of the light element from their mana. Of course, they couldn't use the light element on their own. They just gave off the feeling that they'd somehow copied the light element. It makes sense. After all, if you have the light element, the element that represents life, then you should be able to fight back against the undead curse. Perhaps these guys have retained their intellect, and they're no longer ordinary undead due to the light element's severing effect. As always, it was just his delusions at work and he didn't have any proof, but it made sense. However, he still had his doubts. If those countless tests to resist the undead curse were an attempt to obtain the light element, then who the hell was Sigald von Rededane, the one in charge of those tests? There are plenty of clues. Sarah von Rededane, who could use the light element. The royal family, with power that matched Jizehanu's at the time of their exile and was also the origin of the Rededane family. It was likely that the Rededane family studied the light element. Sarah von Rededane and Sigald von Rededane were likely born with the ability to wield light, and that's why Sigald was capable of executing such a grandiose plan. Like my affinity with the darkness element, he could easily understand why Sarah von Rededane became the first hero, and why Plain was chosen as God's apostle. It was because their family was born with the light element. Lineage was everything. After all, the Golden Shadow General was the firstborn of a family that could control shadows. However, that's where things differ. How you use what you have and how you develop it. And this guy, no matter how I think of it, he failed. At some point, Shin Woo discovered thin black threads secretly traveling across the ground and the nearby buildings. The mana threads were created from the buildings and people's shadows. He thought he had hidden himself, but it was a pitiful attempt to Shin Woo, who could use dark shadow. It might work if the Golden Shadow were fighting against those weaker than him, but how would his technique fare against Shin Woo? Stop. When Shin Woo was about to secretly extend his sword and slice the shadow, Urema, who was standing at the forefront, discovered the traces and stiffly ordered his troops to stop. Unlike the others, Jin, who had been walking slowly to match their pace, stopped with ease. He's nearby. Golden Shadow. A tough battle awaits us. The nearby roads and buildings have been turned inside out. Is it the Golden Shadow General's barrier? Right when the group flinched and stopped, Kai Paul reported through telepathy. The Golden Shadow had been caught in the traps, but ultimately, the Golden Shadow General joined the battle. Although 3 of the Kai Pauls, including one level 7 elite, had sustained critical injuries and were forced to retire, the rest of his forces were able to retreat safely. He was a level 8 capable of controlling shadows and was also a part of the 12 generals, yet none of them had died. As he thought, their anger towards Urema Steelworker was increasing their abilities by a level, or perhaps even more. Tell the injured to return. Pick out only those who can still fight and wait at the place I designate. If all goes well, you may be able to fight against Anti-Skull as well. Understood. Everyone, get ready for battle. He'll likely ambush us. Focus. Shin Woo saw the Metal Army and Anti-Skull prepare for battle and summoned his own weapons. It was the jet black giant Drake Horn Lance that he'd infused darkness mana into prior. Urema Steelworker and Tarion von Rededane flinched at the sight of it. Where did you get darkness? It is darkness. Shin Woo had fully charged his 17 weapons with mana, but only 9 of them had been floating in the air. The other 8 had been hiding in the shadows, but he'd chosen to extract them. He wasn't really trying to show off, but it was kind of laughable that a level 8 golem was flinching. Is this the first time you've seen a lance? If you can wield darkness so easily, then even if you were to fight alone. He's coming. Suddenly, the shadow underneath them spread out and covered the entire area. It seemed as though it would dye the entire world black. Urema Steelworker gritted his teeth, gathered his own mana, and fought back against the darkness. However, he was only able to protect a portion of his golems. Most of them had been trapped within the darkness. Velen von Dorth, Urema Steelworker, you finally show your true colors. To think you'd so fearlessly step foot into one of His Majesty's cities. I'm happy that I'll be able to bury you here. A gloomy man's voice resounded throughout the darkness. Although they were both level 8s, it seemed as though the Golden Shadow General's command over his element overpowered Urema's. Urema instantly gathered his mana and fired it within the darkness. However, the darkness merely dispersed for a short time and soon filled the air once more. You really think you can fill the entire world with darkness? The Underground Empire is governed by darkness. Your metal element is merely unusual. That's all. Come on, I'll show you the true strength of that unusual power of mine. It felt like they'd come to blows at any time. But surprisingly, the Golden Shadow General didn't strike. Rather than challenging Urema Steelworker's golden mana, the Golden Shadow General safely hid within the darkness and then ambushed one of the 4 heavenly commanders. Kiahyok, Stake. It was the right call. Since Stake hadn't been able to mount a proper defense and was completely destroyed. It made sense. After all, it was the surprise attack of a level 8 and one of the 12 generals. Even Shin Woo had briefly lost track of his movements. His stats are geared towards agility and magic. It's a classic strategy. He relies on magic, rather than physical strength to hurt his enemies. Stake Steelworker's death signaled the start of the battle. The Golden Shadow General's forces attacked all at once. His forces hid within the darkness he'd created and continually appeared and disappeared in different areas. They then grouped up and attacked, looking like a wave of darkness. As I thought, using shadows was a specialized form of darkness. But Shin Woo could see them clearly, as he'd reached peak darkness mastery. If he mixed his darkness within theirs, then he could quickly defeat their entire force, but because he knew that Anti-Skull was hiding something, Shin Woo decided to not do more than what was necessary. They act like they're so powerful, but the technique doesn't feel invincible. Hup, Kuhak, Gua, Shin Woo swung his lance strangely. The approaching wave lost its cutting edge and collapsed instantaneously. The Golden Shadow, which had been pointing their weapons at Shin Woo, were flung out. He squashed a portion of them with his lance and challenged the Golden Shadow General. "You've just lost your subordinates. You just going to sit there? Kook, you rat, let's see how long you can avoid me." Shin Woo had just grinned at the face of Stake Steelworker's death and fought off the Golden Shadow with ease. Arama Steelworker was enraged at the sight, spread out his mana, and began to chase after the Golden Shadow General. Tarion von Rededane's anti-skull force was likewise struggling against the Golden Shadow. Let's see, I wonder what anti-skull's hidden objective is. If Rem was with him, then he'd be able to more easily observe their movements. Unfortunately, it wasn't with him right now. But now that it had come to this, there was no helping it. He had no choice but to use his last resort, asking the bones themselves. "All of you, attack Tarion. That's right, so that I can easily kill him unnoticed. Just a little more, you can do it, Golden Shadow." Shin Woo licked his lips and his lance slowly melted into the darkness. The Golden Shadow General probably had no idea that the darkness he'd created was being used by someone else. The darkness swayed and spread. However, that very darkness was ripped apart by golden mana. While the Metal Army and Anti-Skull fought against the Golden Shadow, Arama Steelworker played a game of hide-and-seek with the Golden Shadow General, Velen von Dorth. Their mana mixed together messily and continuously exploded. The two level 8s were so imposing that some of their troops were unable to maintain their balance and fell to the floor. However, the situation was so urgent that they had no time to worry about them. "He's gone that way, damn it, block, Kahak." The Golden Shadow troops hid within the Golden Shadow General's shadow, and even the 4 heavenly commanders were no match for them. They truly were the Emperor's personal assassination squad. If the Metal Army or Anti-Skull were to have faced them alone, it would have been twice as hard to fight them off. Plus, the Golden Shadow General's ability works well in several situations. If his shadow expanded and covered the entire area, it then starts obscuring the line between friend and foe. But the Golden Shadow troops, which were used to said phenomenon, could move with ease and execute their foes. However, their enemies were a different story. They would either attack incorrectly and harm their allies, or they would evade an attack but their movements would overlap with another, causing them to both expose weak points. The confusion was quite entertaining. On the other hand, the Kai Pauls were doing just fine against the Golden Shadow, so much so that Shin Woo was shocked. The key to this battle is the Golden Shadow General, and if we kill him, then we need someone who can keep up with Arama Steelworker. If Sigald von Rededane had been here, then the battle would be progressing a lot differently. Unfortunately, his representative, Tarion von Rededane, was slightly lacking in terms of ability. No, he looked like he was holding back. He was only focused on protecting his allies from harm and wasn't actively trying to fight back. There's a limit to how suspicious you can be. Shin Woo had been quiet watching Tarion and smiled, dumbfounded. He was delaying on purpose. He was trying to extend the battle as long as possible while keeping Anti-Skull's casualties at a bare minimum. What was more hilarious was, he must think that no one had noticed, but he was looking at Shin Woo and trying to find a weak spot. He knew that Tarion couldn't conceal his killing intent, but he didn't think he was this foolish. To think he wouldn't even be able to properly assess his opponent's abilities. Though Shin Woo was concealing them. So we have the same idea. The feint, lingering idea of maintaining their alliance broke at that very instant. If that's what he wanted, then he had no choice but to respond in kind. Jin, just hide for a little bit. Wait, why? While the golden shadow attacked Tarion and obscured his vision, Li Shinwu's body melted into the air. He had discreetly spread his mana everywhere. Li Shinwu's darkness was mixed with the golden shadow general's darkness. Die, you rebel. HMPH. It's laughable that the undead curse has so much influence on one such as yourself. Kook, he said roughly and swung his sword, pushing the golden shadow towards the golems. When he was finished dealing with them, Tarion looked for Li Shinwu once more, but at that moment, something pierced through his back. What appeared behind him was clearly a member of the Golden Shadow. I cannot permit you to live, as someone who opposes our great emperor. Kia-hyuk, his sword seemed entirely comprised of darkness. It was a shadow sword created through his wild card skill, which also doubled as all of his combat skills as well. This sword, which simultaneously possessed the properties of Shadow Horn and Thorn Shadow, was quite powerful indeed, but by fusing with the surrounding darkness, it also paralyzed the attacked foe. A level 8 would be able to use their own mana to eliminate the ambient mana, but it would be impossible for Tarion. The rebels stopped moving. One of ours has beaten Tarion von Rededane. This is our chance. Attack while he's still weakened. Li Shinwu's attack was merely the precursor. Soon, the Golden Shadow rushed crazily towards him and mounted a full-on offensive. The anti-skull were clearly flustered and rushed over to stop them. Unfortunately, the darkness that covered them was completely different now. Protect Lord Tarion, Kia-hyuk. WY, I didn't attack you. D, don't move. This is their trick. Cut through the darkness. But Lord Tarion, Kaik, Ka, they had definitely aimed for the enemy, yet they had cut down their allies instead. They moved towards Tarion, yet they got farther and farther away. The power which had helped them resist the undead curse and maintain their intellect wasn't helping them here. The beginner dark shadow element has become LV8 and magic has increased by 20. It was chaos. The golden shadow went wild, while the anti-skull cried out and cut through the darkness. Since their commander, who could have righted the situation, was paralyzed, anti-skull's forces began to noticeably dwindle. Kaik, damn you, with my light, stop struggling, it won't work. Li Shinwu grinned and whispered to Tarion, who was desperately trying to gather his mana. Because Tarion was a part of the Rededane family, who specialized in light, it was clear that he was trying to use some sort of light spell. But even if he tried, it wouldn't matter. Even if he could create light, he was just level 7 as well as an undead, so he wouldn't be able to beat back Li Shinwu's darkness, would he? Even if he could create light powerful enough to undo his binds, he could just use dark shadow to reverse the light into darkness. So long as he wasn't level 8 or possessed max light mastery or maybe even high rank mastery, he wouldn't be able to overcome his dark shadow. As I thought, you aren't. Golden Shadow, I want to ask you something. Why do you hate me so much? Did you really think you could beat me? How dare you oppose the Rededane clan's light? Oh, so that's it. Perhaps Li Shinwu had been misunderstanding him. He'd thought that Anti-Skull, like his own troops, possessed a clear ego and would be able to move forward and develop, but perhaps these guys were the same as any regular undead. If Sigald's like this too, then I will be extremely disappointed. Do you think someone like you could defeat him? Li Shinwu decided not to listen anymore and gave him the peace of death. There was no reason to listen anymore. You have acquired 5,698,100 perium. You have acquired the LV7 Tarion von Rededane's fingerbone. The Golden Shadow delighted at the sight of Tarion's body disappearing in the air, while Anti-Skull screamed. The golems were also tense, as someone much stronger than even the 4 heavenly commanders had been so easily killed. Golden Shadow, I know it was strong before, but to think it had become even stronger after becoming undead. We can't drag this out any longer. Paul Zero, if we're really allies, then please help our lord. Sure, Guillotine Steelworker had no idea that Li Shinwu was the one who'd killed Tarion, yet he became warier of Golden Shadow and requested for Li Shinwu's help. Li Shinwu came out of the darkness, revealing himself, and replied naturally. In that short period of time, he returned to his heaven-defying general form and was sitting atop his horse, as if they'd never been apart. Darkness? Who? You dare fight me with darkness? Huh? Once Shin Woo got involved, the Golden Shadow General attempted to retreat, but that was impossible. Shin Woo had already finished analyzing his darkness. By the time Shin Woo had mixed his darkness with the Golden Shadow General's, wildcard had already activated. He could only move through the shadows because he was the source of the darkness. There's no way he'd be able to move properly if another person's darkness was mixed with his. As it was a level 8 authority, he should be able to turn it back to his entirely, but that was impossible right now. Because Shin Woo's darkness dwarfed his own. What is this? Gigantic fist. While the Golden Shadow were hesitating, Urema Steelworker took the opportunity to unleash a killing blow. It might fall behind the other 12 generals in terms of speed or special ability, but the force behind metal element mana concentrated at one point was unmatched. Kahawk, the golem's fist and the enemy's armor colliding erupted in a sound akin to a mountain collapsing. Even Shin Woo wouldn't be able to replicate such physical force. This combination of tremendous mass and magic, which was only possible in a golem's body, struck the Golden Shadow General. General, impossible. That person's darkness. The Golden Shadow General had, up until this point, remained untouched, but when the Golden Shadow saw their general fall, they were shocked and altogether attacked Urema Steelworker. However, the golems didn't just stand still. Moreover, the anti-skull joined in, furious at their commander's demise. Good, then, hey, you gotta leave my share too. Urema Steelworker was going to follow up, without giving the Golden Shadow General a chance to recover, but Shin Woo immediately stopped him. The Golden Shadow General had escaped from the brink of death, as if proving that investing almost all of his stats into agility and magic wasn't for nothing. If one more of Urema's attacks went through, then the Golden Shadow General would die and Shin Woo's contribution would lessen. In order to safely procure the bone, Shin Woo had to be the one to kill the general. I told you before, didn't I? The bones are mine. You were just watching this entire time, yet you want to land the final blow? I was analyzing his darkness in order to nullify it. If I didn't, then would you have been able to defeat him this easily? You haven't forgotten that he's level 8 and one of the 12 generals, have you? You're not wrong. He definitely wasn't wrong, as Wildcard could only fully activate when he'd fully analyzed his opponent. It looked like they'd taken him down so easily, but this was all due to his unseen efforts. Shin Woo snorted, piercing the Golden Shadow General's body with his lance and embedding it into the ground. Kahawk, TCH. It's not like I'm teaching a fish how to swim. This would probably be his last-ditch effort. The Golden Shadow General tried to switch his body with a fake, like in Japanese manga, and hide within the darkness, so Shin Woo cut through both the false and real bodies. If Shin Woo hadn't reached peak darkness mastery or didn't possess Wildcard, then he might have been fooled. How did you so easily? It can't be helped. You weren't a good match for me. Regret the fact that I'm good at using the darkness element. Shin Woo grinned and put more pressure into his lance. The shining flame, covered on the outside by darkness, kept the Golden Shadow General from escaping and completely burned him away. You have hunted one of the 12 generals, the LV8 Golden Shadow General, Velen von Dorth. All heroes who contributed gain 50 million perium and all stats are increased by 100. You have acquired 15 permits to God's secret shop. Proficiency in all combat-related skills increases significantly. The wild card skill has become LV3. All stats have increased by 30. Thus, Shin Woo killed another one of the 12 generals. And he'd killed him so easily too. He could have taken care of the general himself quite easily, but he decided not to tell anyone that. Commander, that's impossible. We were able to take care of him somehow. Whenever he's in danger, he can just retreat into the shadows, so even if you beat him, you're not supposed to be able to kill him. He caught him. No, the reason our Lord was even able to hit him was Shin Woo was able to kill one of the 12 generals, the Golden Shadow General that was under the direct control of the Emperor, and everyone was shocked at how futilely he had died. In the midst of all that, Shin Woo nonchalantly picked up the bone that was left behind. It was a leg bone. He also dropped perium, a Byron inner map, his level 6 black leather armor, as well as a dark knife. Shin Woo immediately went for the knife. He checked and mentally noted that his invisible heart was at its max level, nodded his head, and backed off. The rest is all yours. Arama Steelworker just stared at Shin Woo, without even going for the loot. He had realized that Shin Woo had been one-sidedly controlling the battle. The reason he had been able to kill the Golden Shadow General so easily, especially when their affinity was so bad, was because of Shin Woo. He had won, but he didn't feel good at all. It felt like Shin Woo had played around with him throughout the entire fight. Arama had tried to not show his full strength, but Shin Woo may already be aware of that. He had become a puppet that danced upon his stage. To think that I, Arama Steelworker, would be so easily manipulated. Perhaps the moment I met this unknown undead, I was. No, perhaps when I met that skeleton long ago, I had already made the wrong decision. At first, Arama had planned to attack Shin Woo when he was vulnerable, and trade their physical bodies for his life. But he realized that the only reason Shin Woo had even deigned to bargain with them was that it was just easier for him. He hadn't been afraid of him at all. If he attacked him now, then his physical body would be immediately destroyed. He was absolutely sure of it. You are? Once he realized that his hated enemy was clearly stronger than him, Arama actually calmed down. Shin Woo saw the change in his mental state and his eyes changed as well. What are your intentions? You possess such power, so why are you pointlessly playing around here? Life. Shin Woo curtly replied. There was no reason to lie, so he decided to answer honestly. I want to live in a world where I can just live my life. You're already dead, so how exactly are you going to achieve that? I wonder. It might work out in the end. He'd already found success. Shin Woo had pursued life, and as a result of his endeavors, he had become an existence which couldn't be classified as either living or dead. Of course, it was the result of developing several of his abilities, but perhaps it was all due to his ardent wish to live. His start as an undead came about due to his childish wish of not wanting to die. But he didn't need to tell Arama that. Arama Steelworker just watched him with a piercing gaze. Shin Woo just shrugged his shoulders and said, now, let's finish up the rest of them. Anti-Skull, don't just stand there discouraged and get a move on. Your commander is dead. Do you plan on joining him? Kook, who'd die in a place like this? I'd rather not listen to someone like you. But, for Lord Tarion. Since it's for Lord Tarion, I'll get my revenge on these Golden Shadow bastards. Once Tarion had died, Shin Woo was able to reignite their spirits by slightly instigating them and manipulated them wholeheartedly. Of course, the level 7 elites among them were an exception, but even they couldn't voice their hostility towards him now. They merely gritted their teeth and rushed towards the Golden Shadow. Without them even realizing that that was exactly what Shin Woo wanted. Our retreat. We can't hold on any longer. Kook. But now that the commander's dead, we can't hide within the darkness anymore. Kill them all. Don't let a single one of them escape. Once they realized how unfavorable the battle was for them, Golden Shadow tried to retreat immediately, but retreat was impossible even when Velen von Dorth was alive. So how could it become possible for them now? Especially because the Anti-Skull were rushing towards them like madmen as if their very lives were burning out. Kook, these crazy bastards. Fine, let's die together. Kuu, don't forget the name of Anti-Skull, even in the grave. Yuu, I'm not letting go of my sword until I kill you all. Their eyes shone red, and they heroically battled against the Golden Shadow, dying for their cause. They were determined to wipe out the Golden Shadow in order to avenge their leader, and emitted a fearsome spirit. The golems watched on, dumbstruck, and shook. They didn't know that Anti-Skull was such a fearsome organization. If their swords were aimed at them, instead of the Golden Shadow, then not all, but at least 2 of the remaining 3 heavenly commanders would have to be prepared for death. These bastards? Retreat, retreat. Killing your enemy is good and all, but throwing your lives away to do so is foolish. They're not listening at all. The level 7 elites were the only ones to maintain their sanity and were shocked at the sight of their comrades so vigorously attacking the Golden Shadow. They tried to stop them, but because of Shin Woo instigating them with Tarion's death, their hatred towards the Golden Shadow exploded, such that even they couldn't stop their rampage anymore. The level 6s were quickly dwindling. No one would have expected that such rare elites would be dying so futilely. We can't let this continue. Don't you remember Lord Sigald's orders? You fools. If we all die here, then we'll be hindering him. Kuiok. In the midst of all that, there was a problem that arose. The level 7 elites were so busy trying to calm down their subordinates with their command-related skills that they temporarily let down their guard. Of the two of them, one of the commanders was killed by the Golden Shadow's ambush. It was actually Shin Woo. No, Duvain. No, Commander Duvain was. Kook, Kua, you bastards. And so, 2 of the 3 level 7 commanders were killed. Shin Woo didn't even need to provoke them further. Their anger increased even more. But Shin Woo decided to give them a little push. Avenge them. Can you really call yourselves anti-Skull if you can't even avenge your fallen comrades? Kook, that's not true. Commander Tarian, Commander Duvain. I'll avenge you. But whose voice is this anyway? A voice provoked anti-Skull from all across the area. No one knew who was speaking to them, nor where it was coming from, but it was enough to provoke the excited soldiers. And his provocation even reached the last remaining level 7 elite as well. Damn it, damn E. That was easy. Shin Woo, who'd collected Duvain's bone, watched on and tilted his head. He could trick anti-Skull as easily as he could fool the rest of the Empire's undead. However, Shin Woo was overlooking the fact that his instigate skill had grown. When he'd gotten to level 8, his physical strength and magic had obviously grown, along with his elemental power, but he was not yet aware of how much his Joker's innate abilities had grown. This is strange. Is it because of Wildcard? No. Did instigate itself get stronger? It's like I can just activate it with my mind now. If he were still level 7, then he wouldn't be able to take control of another level 7 with just a few words. When he became level 8, he had gained Wildcard, and his very existence could affect the world. Now, his instigate skill had neared the power of an authority that couldn't be explained by his increase in physical strength, magic nor elemental power. And if he were to construct the proper situation with Wildcard, then he could easily control lower-leveled existences than him like this. Good work, Kaik. Shin Woo tested out his instigate skill a few more times and got a feel for his newly improved innate skills. Once he'd succeeded in applying Wildcard better than before, he killed the last level 7 elite commander, who had been wildly fighting against the Golden Shadow. Golden Shadow was almost completely eliminated, as the remaining anti-Skull force had staked their lives on killing them. But they were actually already dead. What an ideal scenario. It was exactly as Shin Woo had planned. If he hadn't felt such murderous intent, then he would have watched a little while longer. It's gotten a bit cleaner. Shin Woo took care of the remaining Golden Shadow and surveyed the battlefield. Since the golems weren't particularly hostile towards him, he decided to keep them around for now. Aside from Stake Steelworker, who had been killed by the Golden Shadow General, the golems were pretty much unscathed. You not only led so many opposing forces here but also manipulated them to your heart's content and achieved the result you desired. This karma goes beyond tactics. It is more akin to control or domination. You have acquired the title, Overlord of the Subconscious. All stats have increased by 15. The instigate skill has become LV9 and magic has increased by 20. The high rank command skill has become LV8 and all stats have increased by 5. When used in conjunction with instigate, you can more effectively ignore the effects of the opposing side's command skill. He'd somewhat expected this, but he'd acquired another amazing title. Shin Woo looked at it, shrugged his shoulders, and then collected the loot. The golems merely watched him, dumbfounded. They didn't know what he'd done exactly, but they had some idea as to what role he had in this battle. But in the midst of that, Arema Steelworker quietly said, "Is this what you wanted? What are you talking about?" "No, never mind." Then, Guillotine Steelworker quietly looked at Arema. Arema firmly shook his head and Guillotine bit his lip and stepped back. The other golems saw those gestures and realized what their commander was conveying. They all wore the same indescribable expression in silence. Good. They're completely disheartened. You're evil. Shin Woo was pleased with the result. If he wanted, he could have taken care of the situation more quietly. But he'd wanted to show the golems, who was superior, by giving them a taste of his abilities. It seemed like it worked. Now, it was time to absorb all the bones he couldn't before, as he had been so busily moving around. He was the type to eat the tastiest part of the meal first, but because he wanted to know what the anti-Skull's true goal was, as well as Sigald von Rededane's location and plans, so he combined the two commanders and Tyrion's bones together and absorbed them first. Even though they were elites, they were lower level than him, so absorbing all three at once only gave him a measly 30 stats, but that wasn't what was important. What was important was, Lord Sigald, please come back safely. Don't worry, there are only 3 people who can stop me in the Empire. One of them, Urema Steelworker, has forged a temporary alliance with us. I'll be fine by myself. I'll be back. I'm counting on you guys to lure them away. By absorbing all 3 of their memories simultaneously, memories flowed through him automatically. They were quite recent memories, so Sigald von Rededane was definitely included in them. That's right, this was a memory of the 3 commanders seeing Sigald off before he undertook an independent mission. As expected, Sigald was here. Tyrion's forces were just bait. You will achieve everything you want. We'll succeed in the name of Anti-Skull. For the Empire, yeah. Sigald von Rededane's voice was clean and possessed a clear will behind it. Shin Woo tried to go through the memories ASAP, as he needed to find out where Sigald was, but then, the last remaining memory of Sigald resounded through his head. For the Empire. For my foolish little sister who has lost her way. Shin Woo suddenly raised his head. He heard a boom go off from within the walls where the cannon was located.